At 11 p.m., I climbed out of my bedroom window with a small bag over my shoulder. 3 black SUVs were already parked below their engines, quietly running in the darkness. Just minutes earlier, I had overheard my husband whispering to his mistress in the library, "If she's still alive by morning, the entire plan falls apart." My blood ran cold. 32 years of marriage had suddenly turned into a hunt. I ran through the rain, leaving my mansion behind. But as my car sped onto a deserted mountain road, I pressed the brakes and realized they no longer worked. This story starts quietly but builds to something powerful. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to choose between staying silent or speaking your truth? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs. A quick note. Some details are fictionalized to highlight the lesson, but the heart of this story, the message, is what truly matters. The camera clicked off and my husband's smile died with the shutter. I watched it happen from 18 inches away, Arthur's carefully constructed warmth draining from his face like water through a sieve. 1 second, he was the devoted husband, gripping my hand for Colorado Lifestyle magazine's anniversary. Spread the next. He was something else entirely. Something cold. "That's perfect," Rachel Whitfield said, lowering her Nikon. She'd been my colleague at the Denver Post 15 years ago, back when I still had a byline and a backbone. Now she photographed society marriages for glossy regional magazines, while I sat in Cherry Hills Estates pretending mine was real. "Mrs. Ingram, you look radiant. 32 years, what's your secret?" Arthur Ingram, 64, stood at the marble fireplace in his tailored Brioni suit, every inch the self-made resort magnate they were profiling for their power couples feature. He released my hand and moved behind my chair fingers, settling on my shoulders like a claim of ownership. I felt his breath against my ear before I heard the words. "Smile like that one more time," he whispered, "and I will adjust your dosage." My mouth kept moving, kept forming the answer Rachel expected, even as every muscle in my body went rigid. "Trust," I heard myself say, hollow as a drum. "We've always trusted each other completely." Rachel's lens caught my face at that exact moment. I saw her finger pause on the shutter, saw something flicker behind her professional smile, recognition maybe, or concern. But she said nothing. People never do. At 61, I had spent 32 years as Arthur Ingram's wife, but I'd forgotten I once broke the Silver Peak mining scandal as Denver's sharpest investigative journalist. That woman seemed like someone I'd read about in an obituary. Mr. Ingram one more by the window. Rachel repositioned her equipment and Arthur's fingers lifted from my shoulders. I exhaled. The shoot lasted another 40 minutes. Arthur performed brilliantly, the attentive husband, the self-made CEO of Ingram Summit Resorts, $280 million mountain empire spanning 12 properties across Colorado and Wyoming. He talked about our early years, our children Viveka and Conrad, our commitment to Colorado's business community. Every word was true. Every word was a lie. When Rachel finally packed her gear and left, Arthur walked her to the door with the warmth of a man who'd never threatened his wife's medication. In the same breath, he smiled for cameras. I stayed in the living room, hands folded in my lap, waiting for permission to move. He didn't come back. I heard his office door close upstairs, heard the lock click. The sound I'd been conditioned to recognize as freedom, temporary, conditional, but mine for a few hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 11:30, I gave up, pulled on my robe, and headed downstairs for water. The house was dark except for a strip of amber light spilling from beneath the library door. Arthur's voice carried into the hallway, low and controlled. I stopped walking. "The timeline is accelerating," he said. "We need to move on the conservatorship within 6 weeks." A woman's voice responded familiar, but I couldn't place it until she laughed. Through the library door crack, I recognized Iris Gutierrez's voice, 54 Arthur's operations director for Ingram Summit Resorts, and my former Denver Post colleague from 1995, who I'd helped get her first investigative assignment. She'd sent me flowers on our anniversary. The card had said, "To lasting love." "And if she resists the evaluation?" Iris asked. "She won't." She doesn't trust her own memory anymore. That's the beauty of 14 months of work. I stood in that hallway for what felt like an hour, but was probably 90 seconds watching my hands shake in the dark before I understood I wasn't losing my mind. I was being erased. If she vanishes into a psychiatric ward, things become much simpler. Arthur continued. The children will believe whatever I tell them. Conrad already thinks she's deteriorating. He commented on it last month. You're certain the doctor will cooperate? Iris sounded clinical detached, like they were discussing a quarterly report instead of my disappearance. Dr. Pemberton has been very accommodating. 3 sessions, carefully documented episodes, and we'll have everything we need for emergency commitment. If she vanishes, it becomes simpler for everyone. My back pressed against the hallway wall. The cool plaster felt real. The racing pulse in my throat felt real. But according to Arthur, my memory, the thing I'd built a 15-year investigative career on, was supposed to be failing. Except it wasn't. I remembered everything. Every conversation he claimed never happened. Every document he said I'd misplaced. Every appointment he insisted I'd invented. My mind was a steel trap that had spent 32 years pretending to be broken. And if the conservatorship proceedings drag out, Iris asked. Arthur's answer came swift and certain. They won't. I've done this before. Silence stretched between them. When Iris spoke again, her voice carried a different weight. How many times? I stopped breathing. She'll be the third. The third, 2 women before me, gone. My investigative journalist's brain, the one I thought had died 28 years ago when Arthur convinced me to leave the Denver Post, fired up with sudden crystalline clarity. Not gone. Just buried. Waiting. I stepped back into the shadows, hand pressed over my mouth to silence the sound trying to escape. Questions cascaded through my mind with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 15 years connecting dots other people couldn't see. Who were they? Where are they now? What institutions? What doctors? What legal mechanisms? And underneath everything, what evidence did he leave behind? Arthur had made one critical miscalculation. He'd spent 14 months, I noted the timeline, filed it away, convincing me I couldn't trust my memory. But gaslighting only works if the target believes the lies. And I had spent 3 decades pretending to believe, while my real mind stayed sharp, stayed hidden, stayed alive. If I'm the third, I thought then I need to find out what happened to the first 2 women. That knowledge might be the only thing keeping me alive. The library door handle turned. I moved fast and silent the way I used to move through courthouse hallways chasing sources who didn't want to be found. By the time Arthur stepped into the hallway, I was already gone a ghost in my own house, invisible and awake. By 2 a.m, I knew testing my memory was the only way to prove I wasn't the woman Arthur needed me to be. I sat in the guest bedroom with a blank sheet of paper, my hands steadier than they'd been in years. Arthur had moved me to this room 6 months ago, claiming my restlessness disturbed his sleep. Now I understood it was another form of isolation. One more thread cut. I picked up a pen and wrote from memory, premarital agreement between Judith Ann Brennan and Arthur William Ingram, executed October 12, 1991. Then I kept writing. Article 1, separate property. Each party acknowledges and agrees that all property, real and personal, owned by either party prior to the marriage, shall remain the separate property of that party. The words flowed like I was reading from the original document. Every clause, every subsection, every comma I'd negotiated with Arthur's attorney when I was 33 years old and still believed prenuptial agreements were about protection, not prophecy. Article 3, subsection 2. In the event of dissolution by mutual consent, all marital assets acquired during the marriage shall be divided according to proportional financial contribution, excluding inheritance and trust distributions. I wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. 4 pages of dense legal language reconstructed perfectly from a document I'd signed 32 years ago and hadn't seen since. My investigative journalist's brain trained to memorize testimony, recall depositions, reconstruct meetings from notes taken years prior, delivered everything with crystalline precision. When I finished, I stared at those pages and understood what Arthur had actually accomplished. He hadn't destroyed my memory. He'd convinced me not to trust it. These were two entirely different things. A woman who can't remember is helpless. A woman who remembers but doesn't trust her own recall is something far more useful. She can be shaped, redirected, controlled. She provides her own chains. I folded those pages carefully and slid them into the lining of my left shoe, working the leather insole loose with my fingernail until the papers disappeared completely. The first secret I'd kept from Arthur in 32 years. Sleep was impossible after that. I waited until I heard his bedroom door open at 6:30, heard his shower run, heard him descend the stairs and leave for his Saturday board meeting at Ingram Summit headquarters. His routine was as predictable as a metronome and just as unfeeling. At 10 o'clock, I went to the basement. The archive room occupied the northeast corner, climate-controlled and organized with the same meticulous precision Arthur applied to everything he owned, including me. Cardboard banker's boxes lined metal shelving, each labeled in his neat block print, tax records 2015 to 2019, property deeds, corporate filings. I found my boxes on the bottom shelf pushed against the concrete wall. Judith Personal 2010 to 2023. 3 boxes for 13 years. I pulled the most recent one and sat on the cold floor. Inside, birthday cards from the children, old appointment calendars, a few photo albums, and underneath, spiral-bound notebooks. My handwriting filled the page's entries I didn't remember making but recognized instantly as mine. The first dated entry was from April 2019. Living room clock shows 3:15 when I come downstairs. My phone says 5:15. 2-hour difference. Asked Arthur, which is correct. He looked concerned, said the clock has always matched his watch. Checked later, it did. Don't understand what happened. My chest tightened. I remembered that day. Remembered Arthur's gentle voice suggesting I was overtired, that I should rest more, that stress-affected perception. I turned pages, more entries. June 2019. Car keys not where I left them on kitchen counter. Found them in coat pocket. Arthur says I'm forgetting again. Getting worse. August 2019. Swear I set alarm for 7 a.m. Woke at 9:30, alarm shows 9 a.m. setting. Arthur had breakfast alone. Disappointed. December 2019. Saw someone in the garden at 2 a.m. Arthur checked, no one there. No footprints in snow. He's worried. Making doctor appointment. Every entry described exactly what Arthur had later weaponized against me. The moved objects, the altered times, the phantom sightings. I'd been documenting my own manufactured insanity without realizing it. But dozens of pages had been torn out. Clean rips, careful removal. The spiral binding showed gaps where whole sections used to be. I flipped to the final entry dated January 2020. I have to tell someone, but who will believe me now? My handwriting stopped there. But directly beneath, in Arthur's precise script. Exactly, my love. His handwriting in my private journal, mocking me. I sat on that basement floor holding evidence that Arthur had been reading my documentation for years. That he'd torn out pages, probably the ones where I'd started to see patterns, started to question. That he'd left this final entry intact, deliberately knowing I'd eventually find it and understand how thoroughly I'd been watched. But he'd made one critical error. He'd assumed that understanding my surveillance would break me further. Instead, it clarified everything. These notebooks weren't records of my deterioration. They were evidence logs. I'd been doing what investigative journalists do, documenting observable phenomena, time-stamping events, creating a chain of evidence. The hallucinations weren't madness. They were Arthur's methodology, carefully recorded by a woman whose training ran deeper than his gaslighting. I pulled every notebook from the box and stacked them carefully. Photographed each page with my phone angles adjusted to avoid glare. Then I took the original notebooks, wrapped them in an old pillowcase, and tucked them behind the water heater, where Arthur's obsessive organization would never look disorder, was invisible to him. I returned the empty box to its shelf and climbed the stairs. In the kitchen, I made myself tea and stood at the window overlooking the manicured gardens of our Cherry Hills estate. To anyone watching, I was Arthur Ingram's troubled wife, having a quiet morning. No one could see the evidence files now stored in my phone. No one could see the reconstructed prenuptial agreement pressed against the sole of my foot. For the first time in 3 decades, I was keeping secrets from my husband instead of the other way around. And I just realized something that changed everything. I'd been my own witness all along. I just hadn't known it yet. 3 days of secret keeping had taught me patience. Now it was time to use it. I moved through my own house like a crime scene investigator notepad, in hand cataloging every lie Arthur had built into the walls. He was at Ingram Summit headquarters for back-to-back board meetings, his calendar blocked until 6:30. That gave me 4 hours to document what I'd been living inside for decades. I started in the living room where Arthur had smiled for Colorado Lifestyle magazine's cameras. The antique clock on the mantel read 3:47. I pulled out my phone, 5:47. Exactly 2 hours. I wrote it down. Living room clock 3:47 p.m. Phone 5:47 p.m. Differential 120 minutes. Deliberate. The same 2-hour gap I documented in my 2019 notebooks. Not random confusion, systematic manipulation. In the kitchen, I found 3 more clocks microwave oven wall mount, all precisely synchronized to each other, all exactly 2 hours behind real time. Someone had to reset them constantly to maintain the illusion. Someone had to care that much about disorienting me. I opened the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom. 24 amber prescription bottles lined the glass shelves, each labeled in Arthur's physician's neat print. But the bottle marked Vitamin C 1,000 milligrams daily caught my attention. I opened it and inhaled. That scent, sharp, slightly sweet with a chemical undertone that had nothing to do with ascorbic acid. I knew that smell the way pilots know altitude sickness. In 1997, I'd covered the Mercy Hospital malpractice trial, a nurse systematically sedating patients with benzodiazepines disguised as routine medications. The defense had brought in samples. I'd spent 3 weeks in that courtroom learning to recognize lorazepam by scent alone. This wasn't vitamin C. I photographed the bottle label visible, then replaced it exactly where I'd found it. Added to my notepad, medicine cabinet, bottle labeled Vitamin C contains probable benzodiazepine. Smell matches lorazepam from Mercy Hospital case 1997. My hand stayed steady. That surprised me. I'd expected rage, maybe fear, old instincts, still sharp. I moved through the master bedroom next. Arthur's side of the bed, pristine and untouched since he'd moved me to the guest room. I scanned the crown, molding the ceiling fan, the smoke detector. There, tiny lens embedded in the smoke detector casing, pinhole camera professional grade. I'd seen similar equipment during a 2003 corporate espionage case. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew what to look for. I checked the guest bedroom where I now slept. Another camera in the ceiling light fixture. Study camera in the bookshelf spine of a fake leather-bound volume. Kitchen camera in the microwave door seal. 32 years. How many of those years had I been living inside his laboratory? I forced myself to keep moving, keep documenting. Emotion was useful for juries, not investigation. Right now, I needed the part of my brain that could walk through crime scenes without flinching. The master closet was Arthur's private domain, 200 square feet of custom cabinetry, holding suits organized by season shoes, arranged by formality ties color-coded. I'd learned years ago not to disturb his system. Today I disturbed everything. Behind the winter suits in the back corner, I found a small metal cabinet I'd never noticed before. Locked, but not basic key lock that had been standard in the 90s. I used a bobby pin from my hair and the edge of my driver's license. The techniques came back instantly from a 1999 burglary defense case where I'd interviewed a reformed locksmith. The cabinet swung open. Inside a compact server about the size of a hardcover book, black metal casing, 3 indicator lights blinking in sequence red, amber, green, Ethernet cable running through a hole drilled in the cabinet back, disappearing into the wall. I pulled out my phone and photographed it from 3 angles. Then I noticed the small LCD screen on the server's face. Upload active. Bandwidth 47.3 megabits per second. Storage cloud sync enabled. The upload light blinked green. Live feed. He was watching me right now. My breath caught. Not from fear, from understanding. This wasn't just surveillance. This was real-time monitoring. Someone somewhere was looking at footage of me discovering the surveillance system, watching me photograph the server, recording my investigation of their recording. For half a second, I considered closing the cabinet, pretending I'd never found it. Then I thought about the two women who came before me, the ones who'd been erased so completely I didn't even know their names, the ones who probably had this exact same moment, this exact same choice. I wondered if they'd chosen silence. I stood up, leaving the cabinet open, and walked back through the master bedroom. I scanned the ceiling until I found what I was looking for, the pinhole camera in the smoke detector. Its tiny lens pointed directly at the bed Arthur no longer shared with me. I moved closer. Then I found the smallest camera, the one in the living room bookshelf lens, no bigger than a pin tucked between two volumes of a leather-bound encyclopedia set we'd never once opened. I looked directly into it. For the first time in years, I smiled. A real smile. The kind I used to give sources who thought they were smarter than me. The kind that said I'd just figured out their whole game and they didn't know it yet. "All right, Arthur," I whispered to the lens. "If you want evidence, so do I." I held the smile for 3 seconds, long enough to make sure it recorded clearly. Long enough that whoever was watching would see exactly what I meant. Then I turned and walked toward the wine cellar where Arthur kept his private safe and thought his secrets were secure. The wine cellar safe opened with a soft click techniques I'd learned covering a 1994 burglary defense case muscle memory I didn't know I'd kept. I knelt on the cool stone floor between racks of vintage Bordeaux that Arthur collected the way other men collected trophies. The safe door swung open, revealing stacked documents and a leather notebook the size of a prayer book. I pulled out the notebook first. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, not Arthur's usual block print, but flowing shorthand characters that danced across ruled lines in tight formations. Greg's shorthand. The system I'd taught him in 1992 when he'd enrolled in night business courses at Denver University and complained that lecture notes took too long to transcribe. I'd spent 3 months that winter teaching him the curves and hooks, the brief forms and phrase shortcuts. We'd practiced at the kitchen table after dinner, him copying my examples while I corrected his stroke angles. It was one of the few times I remembered feeling useful to him instead of ornamental. Now I was reading his notes about my destruction written in the private language I'd given him. My fingers translated automatically years of investigative journalism training, making the decryption effortless. Month 1, July 2022. Introduce medication regimen. Begin with vitamin supplements to establish routine compliance. Lorazepam 2 milligrams disguised dosage. Month 3. Adjust environmental markers. Clocks offset by 2 hours. Relocate personal items to different locations. Document or confusion. Month 6. Establish pattern of cognitive decline. Brief children on mother's deteriorating condition. Prepare Conrad for CFO role transition. Ensure Vivica understands legal frameworks. Month 10. Increase medication to 4 milligrams. Begin institutional consultations. Dr. Pemberton confirms cooperation with emergency evaluation process. Month 14. September 2023. Execute final conservatorship filing. Timeline September 23rd. Emergency psychiatric hold. Asset transfer completion within 72 hours. 14 months. Every step planned. Every manipulation scheduled. He'd taken the investigative shorthand I taught him with love and used it to architect my erasure. I photographed every page hand steady, despite the rage building behind my sternum like pressure in a closed system. September 23rd. 4 days from now. Whatever final step meant I had 4 days to prevent it. I set the notebook aside and reached deeper into the safe. My fingers touched something at the back, a manila envelope sealed with tape that had yellowed to the color of old bone. The envelope wasn't labeled, but the tape's age suggested decades, not years. I broke the seal carefully. Inside official documents on State of Colorado letterhead dated April 1978. Involuntary commitment order. Patient name Arthur William Ingram, age 17. Petitioner Richard W. Ingram. Father and legal guardian. Facility Pinebrook Psychiatric Hospital, Colorado Springs. Duration indefinite pending medical review. I read the petition statement 3 times. Subject displays symptoms of acute oppositional defiant disorder, threatening family business interests and demonstrating inability to manage inherited responsibilities. Father requests emergency psychiatric intervention to protect minor child and preserve family estate. Richard Ingram had committed his own son to secure control of the resort empire when Arthur showed signs of independence. Clip to the commitment order clinical intake notes in a doctor's cramped handwriting. Patient exhibits normal cognitive function but refuses cooperation with father's business directives. No evidence of psychiatric disorder. Recommend discharge. Someone had crossed out that recommendation in thick black marker. And beneath the papers, a single sheet of sketch paper, edges worn soft with age. Crude pencil drawing of a figure behind bars, face barely detailed, but posture unmistakably defeated. In the bottom corner, shaky handwriting, Arthur W.S. April, 1978, 17 years old, locked in a psychiatric facility by his own father, not because he was sick, because he was inconvenient. I sat back on my heels holding that drawing and felt something I hadn't expected recognition. Arthur wasn't creating a new playbook. He was following the only one he'd ever known. His father had taught him that institutional power could erase inconvenient people, that wealth could buy medical compliance, that family members were assets to be controlled, not people to be loved. Victim becomes perpetrator. The cycle completes itself. For 3 seconds, I felt genuine pity for the frightened 17-year-old boy who'd drawn himself in a cage, the child who'd learned that love meant control and family meant weaponized psychiatry. Then I thought about the words, final step in his ledger, thought about my granddaughter Vera, 15 years old, the same age Arthur's own daughter Vivica had been when this 14-month plan began. Thought about the 2 women before me who disappeared into whatever institutions Arthur's wealth had purchased. The pity didn't disappear. It just stopped mattering. I understood now. Arthur was recreating his father's crimes because trauma doesn't teach lessons, it teaches patterns. Abused children often become abusers, not because they're evil, but because their blueprint for power is broken from the start. But understanding a monster's origin story doesn't obligate you to let it eat you. I carefully photographed the commitment papers and the drawing. Then I folded the sketch, that heartbreaking testament to a broken boy, and slid it into my pocket alongside the pages I'd hidden in my shoe lining days ago. Evidence. All of it evidence. Arthur had been 17 when his father locked him away to steal his inheritance. He was 64 now, 47 years later, preparing to use the identical system on his wife. The same institutional weapons, the same medical corruption, the same cold calculus that people were obstacles to be removed rather than humans to be seen. I closed the safe, spun the dial, and repositioned the Bordeaux rack exactly as I'd found it. The surveillance cameras would show I'd been in the wine cellar, but Arthur couldn't know what I'd discovered without admitting he'd hidden 45-year-old psychiatric commitment papers in his private safe. I climbed the stairs back to the main floor, that pencil drawing pressed against my ribs through the thin fabric of my pocket. I understood why Arthur became this monster. His father had built the template. Generational trauma had refined it. Wealth and power had enabled it. It changed absolutely nothing about what I had to do. Understanding doesn't equal forgiveness, and knowledge doesn't equal surrender. Knowledge without action was just autobiography. I needed to know if my children could still be saved. 2 days later, I sat across from my daughter in the living room and prepared to test whether she was my ally or Arthur's weapon. Vivica, 33, and sharp as the contracts she drafted for her father's legal team, sat with her ankles crossed and hands folded in her lap, the posture of someone conducting an intervention. My son Conrad, 36 and CFO of the resort empire, stood near the fireplace with the hollow compliance I'd watched deepen over the past 11 years. I'd called them both that morning, asked if they could visit, said I needed to talk about something important. They'd arrived within an hour. Mom. Vivica started, voice careful and measured. We've been worried about you. I watched her face, looked for the little girl who used to bring me wildflowers from the garden, found only Arthur's careful construction. Worried how? I asked. Conrad shifted his weight. Dad mentioned you've been confused lately, forgetting things, getting upset over nothing. Give me an example. Vivica glanced at her brother, the kind of coordinated look that meant they'd rehearsed this conversation. Last week you accused Dad of moving your car keys, she said. He showed you the tracker app. They were exactly where you left them in your purse. I remembered that day. Remembered finding my keys in a purse I never carried in a zippered pocket I never used. Remembered Arthur's patient explanation about my failing memory. And you believe that's what happened? I asked. Vivica's expression softened into something that looked like pity. Mom, you're imagining things again. We're all worried about you. The phrase landed like an accusation. Imagining things. The same words Arthur had used for 14 months. Dad is just trying to protect you, Conrad added. You need to trust him. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man who now spoke his father's lines with his father's inflection. Whatever medication Arthur had been giving me, I suspected Conrad had been receiving his own version for years. That hollow compliance wasn't natural. It was chemical. Protect me from what I asked. Vivica leaned forward. Mom, you need a professional cognitive evaluation. It's for your own safety. I froze. Cognitive evaluation petition. That exact phrase appeared in civil commitment dockets, the confidential legal filings that preceded involuntary psychiatric holds. It wasn't consumer language. It wasn't something you'd say casually unless you'd been reading commitment paperwork. My daughter had just leaked internal legal knowledge she shouldn't possess. Where did you hear that phrase? I asked quietly. What phrase? Cognitive evaluation petition. Vivica blinked. I said, professional cognitive evaluation. You're mixing up words again, Mom. But I'd heard her clearly, and she knew it. Conrad moved closer, putting his hand on Vivica's shoulder, a united front. We're trying to help. Dad arranged an appointment for tomorrow with Dr. Pemberton, just a routine wellness check. Tomorrow, September 22nd, one day before the final step in Arthur's ledger. I understood then. They weren't betraying me. They were weapons Arthur had spent years sharpening, so precisely calibrated they didn't even realize they were cutting. Betrayal would have been cleaner. This watching my children parrot the language of my own institutionalization burned worse than any affair could. I'll think about it, I said. Vivica stood. Mom, we really think... I said, I'll think about it. She exchanged another look with Conrad. Then they left, duty performed, consciences clear. I sat in that living room for 20 minutes after they drove away, adding their names to the list of things Arthur had stolen from me. The next morning, I drove to the supermarket on Colorado Boulevard. I needed eggs bred normalcy, but mostly I needed to confirm a pattern. The gray sedan appeared 3 stalls away from my parking spot. Same vehicle I'd seen outside the pharmacy 2 weeks ago. Same fender scratch on the right side where someone had scraped a concrete pillar. Same driver, middle-aged man in a baseball cap phone, held at an angle that suggested photography, not texting. Theron Chambers, 47 private investigator who didn't know I'd been documenting his license plate and fender damage for 14 days. I showed no reaction, pulled my grocery bags from the trunk, walked into the store at a normal pace, bought milk, eggs, coffee, stood in the checkout line like a woman who didn't know she was being surveilled. When I returned to my car, the sedan was still there. I drove home carefully, obeying every traffic law, giving him nothing to report except boring compliance. In my bedroom, I pulled the prenuptial agreement pages from my shoe lining and added a new entry on the back. September 22nd, gray sedan. License 7KDM 394. Third confirmed sighting. Professional tail. Minimum 2 plus weeks surveillance. Client verified. Then I tucked the pages back into hiding and went downstairs to make dinner Arthur wouldn't eat. That evening, Theron Chambers sat in his gray sedan outside a coffee shop in Littleton, uploading the day's surveillance photos to his encrypted client portal. Judith Ingram at the supermarket, Judith Ingram driving home, Judith Ingram doing absolutely nothing suspicious. His phone buzzed. Encrypted message from the client. "She knows you're there. Escalate surveillance." Theron stared at the screen. He'd been doing this work for 19 years, insurance fraud, cheating spouses, corporate espionage. He knew how to tail a target without being spotted. If the wife had made him, she was better than he'd estimated. Or the husband was paranoid. He typed back, "Understood." But his hands tracked a slight tremor as he sent it. Escalate surveillance. In his business, that meant one of two things: physical intercept or evidence planning. Either way, it meant crossing from observer to participant, from documentation to action. He looked at the photo of Judith Ingram on his passenger seat, 61 elegant buying groceries, with the careful precision of someone who knew she was being watched. The text arrived at 8:47 p.m. The PI's hands shook. He knew what escalation meant. I watched him through my rearview mirror from 3 stalls away, parked in the coffee shop lot where I'd followed him after dinner. His phone lit up in the darkness. He read the message, typed a response, then lowered the device slowly. His hands trembled just enough that I could see it from where I sat. Whatever Arthur had just ordered him to do, the private investigator knew it crossed a line. And so did I. Whatever line the private investigator wouldn't cross, I'd crossed a different one. I'd stopped pretending to be afraid. The psychiatrist asked his 5th leading question, and I realized I was being evaluated for a conservatorship petition, not my health. Dr. Gregory Hollis, 58, sat behind his mahogany desk, wearing a pre-programmed mask of sympathy, a psychiatrist Arthur had retained not to diagnose but to document. His office in a Lakewood medical building was sterile in the way that suggested corporate compliance, not healing. Certificates lined the walls. None mentioned geriatric psychiatry or memory disorders. All focused on legal consultation and forensic evaluation. Arthur sat in the chair beside me, close enough that his knee pressed against mine, the possessive contact that looked like spousal support. "Mrs. Ingram." Dr. Hollis began, pen poised over a pre-formatted intake sheet. "Can you tell me what year it is, and describe any confusion you've experienced lately?" I recognized the structure instantly. The question was designed to elicit rambling, unfocused responses that could be quoted in court briefs as evidence of disorientation. A competent answer would be brief and factual. An incompetent answer would be defensive and elaborate. I gave him journalism. "September 22nd, 2023. I said. "I've experienced deliberate environmental manipulation designed to induce disorientation, altered clocks set 2 hours behind actual time medication, substitution with benzodiazepines disguised as vitamin supplements, covert surveillance via hidden cameras in 5 rooms. Would you like me to provide specific dates and documentation?" The doctor's pen stopped moving. Arthur's knee pressed harder against mine. "Warning." Dr. Hollis recovered smoothly. "Mrs. Ingram, those are very serious allegations. Can you tell me when you first began experiencing these concerns?" Concerns, not observations, not discoveries. Concerns suggested delusion. I wasn't a patient being examined. I was a witness being cross-examined, and I'd spent 15 years teaching sources how to survive hostile questioning. I first documented systematic clock manipulation in my personal journal on April 14th, 2019, I said. The living room timepiece showed 3:47 p.m., while my cellular device displayed 5:47 p.m. I initially attributed the discrepancy to mechanical failure. Subsequent documentation revealed a consistent 2-hour offset maintained across multiple timekeeping devices, suggesting deliberate coordination rather than random malfunction. Every sentence was a courtroom-ready statement of fact. Dr. Hollis glanced at Arthur. The mask of sympathy was slipping. "And the surveillance cameras you mentioned?" he asked. "Pinhole cameras," I clarified. "Professional grade, located in smoke detector casings, bookshelf spines, and appliance seals. Footage uploads to a compact server in the master bedroom closet via encrypted connection. The upload indicator light cycles red, amber, green at approximately 2-second intervals. Arthur shifted in his chair. I felt his tension through the knee contact. The doctor tried a different approach. Mrs. Ingram, your husband tells me you've been having difficulty sleeping, anxiety, memory lapses. Do you recall these episodes? I recall being administered lorazepam without informed consent for approximately 14 months, I said. The medication produces documented side effects including short-term memory impairment, confusion, and sleep disturbance. I discontinued the substance 5 days ago. Withdrawal symptoms have been manageable. Dr. Hollis set down his pen. Mrs. Ingram, I want to help you, but these allegations are documented, I finished, with photographs, journal entries, and physical evidence. I'm happy to provide chain of custody authentication if you're planning to submit this evaluation to civil court. Silence filled the office. Arthur's hand found my shoulder. To Dr. Hollis, it probably looked comforting. I felt the fingers digging into muscle tissue. Sweetheart, Arthur said, voice gentle as poison. You're confusing Dr. Hollis with these elaborate stories. We talked about this. The stress has been making you see patterns that aren't there. I turned to look at my husband, watched him deploy the concerned spouse performance he'd perfected over 32 years. Then I looked back at Dr. Hollis. In 1995, I covered the Mercy Hospital malpractice trial, I said. A nurse systematically sedated patients with benzodiazepines to falsify compliance records. The defense argued the patients were unreliable witnesses due to pre-existing confusion. The prosecution proved medication-induced impairment through hair follicle analysis and testimony from patients who documented symptoms before chemical exposure. The nurse received 18 years. The hospital paid $42 million in settlements. I wrote 17 articles on the case. I still have my notes. Dr. Hollis stared at me. Your point, Mrs. Ingram, drugging someone to make them seem incompetent, then using that incompetence to justify institutional control, is a documented legal pattern with established case precedent. I'm simply noting that this evaluation follows a familiar structure. The doctor glanced at Arthur again. This time, Arthur's mask had cracks showing. I think we have enough for today, Dr. Hollis said, closing his notebook with more force than necessary. Mr. Ingram, could I speak with you privately? Arthur stood. His hand left my shoulder slowly, reluctantly, like he was afraid I might disappear if he stopped touching me. I'll just be a moment, sweetheart, he said. They stepped into the hallway. Through the half-closed door, I heard Dr. Hollis's voice drop to a professional whisper. Not what you described. Extremely lucid. Can't support emergency filing based on this presentation. Arthur's response was too quiet to hear. I sat in that sterile office and added Dr. Gregory Hollis to the list of people who just learned that Arthur Ingram didn't always get what he paid for. 5 minutes later, Arthur returned. His smile was perfectly calibrated, but something behind his eyes had shifted. Uncertainty, maybe, or recalculation. Ready to go home, he asked. His eyes narrowed. For the first time in 3 decades, Arthur Ingram couldn't read me. Outside the medical building, Arthur squeezed my arm, the usual possessive grip disguised as affection, and said, I think today went well, don't you? I looked at him directly and smiled the same thin smile I'd given the camera lens days ago. I think it did too, I said. The words hung between us perfectly ambiguous. Agreement could mean I believed the evaluation went as he planned, or it could mean I knew it had failed spectacularly and was enjoying watching him pretend otherwise. For the first time in 32 years, I'd given Arthur Ingram an answer he couldn't categorize as compliance or defiance. I watched genuine unease flicker across his flawless mask, and I smiled a little wider. Arthur's unease lasted exactly 48 hours before he tried to erase it with theater. 2 nights later, he placed a designer dress on my bed, silk deep emerald still tagged and lit, candles around the master bedroom mirror. Classical music played from hidden speakers, staging another one of his psychological rituals. He'd done this before years ago when I'd shown signs of independence. The performance was always the same atmospheric lighting, expensive gifts, intimate grooming. A calculated intimacy designed to remind me I was his creation, his possession, his carefully maintained artifact. Put on the dress, he said from the doorway. I did. Not because I was compliant, but because I wanted to see how the ritual had changed now that I'd read the instruction manual. When I emerged from the bathroom, Arthur was waiting in the chair beside the vanity. He patted the seat in front of the mirror. "Sit," he said softly. I sat. He picked up the silver-backed hairbrush, $100, at an estate sale in Vail purchased specifically for these performances, and began brushing my hair with slow, rhythmic strokes. The candlelight caught his reflection behind mine. We looked like a Renaissance painting of conjugal devotion. "Look in the mirror, my love," he whispered, his voice intimate as a lover's. Outside of me, who would ever believe a 61-year-old woman with failing memory, failing skin, failing mind? "Stroke, stroke, stroke. You think you're gathering evidence," he continued. "You think you're building a case, but all you're doing is documenting your own decline. Every photograph, every note, every moment you spend obsessing over clocks and cameras just proves how fractured you've become." The brush moved through my hair like a metronome. "You aren't running from me," Arthur said. "You're running from your own aging and madness. I'm the only one who still sees you as beautiful, the only one who would care for a woman coming undone." I looked at our reflections. His face concerned, loving, patient. My face, older than his by 3 years, marked by stress, he deliberately engineered. And I didn't believe a single word. Not sudden bravery, cold clarity. I'd read his 14-month ledger. I knew this ritual was scheduled between month 14 cognitive evaluation and month 15 asset transfer completion, psychological reinforcement designed to destabilize my resolve. But you can't destabilize someone who knows your construction blueprints. Arthur leaned closer, his breath against my ear. "Say it, sweetheart. Tell me you understand." I met his eyes in the mirror. "I understand perfectly." The ambiguity pleased him. He smiled, kissed the top of my head, and set down the brush. "Good girl," he said. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we're attending the resort investors' dinner. I'll need you presentable." He left the room, closing the door with the soft click of someone who believed he'd just won. After he left, I looked back at my reflection. The woman in the mirror wasn't breaking. Not anymore. I changed out of the designer dress, hung it carefully in the closet where Arthur would find it in the morning, and feel satisfied. Then I returned to the guest bedroom and added tonight's performance to my hidden documentation. "You taught me never to trust myself," I whispered to the empty room. "That lesson just expired." The next afternoon, I stood in the estate garden where autumn had carpeted the ground in gold and rust. The aspen trees were shedding their leaves in the systematic way that marked Colorado September turning into October. I heard footsteps running across the grass. Vera, my 14-year-old granddaughter and Conrad's daughter, ran to embrace me, the only person in this compound who still hugged me like she meant it. Thin arms wrapped around my waist, face pressed against my shoulder. Genuine affection, unmanipulated and pure. "Hi, Grandma," she said, then immediately whispered lower. "Don't react, just listen." I kept my expression neutral, one hand stroking her hair the way I used to when she was small. "I hid an encrypted app on this phone," Vera whispered, pressing something into my coat pocket. "Grandpa doesn't know. We only talk through here, okay? Nobody else can see our messages." She pulled back, smiling brightly for any cameras that might be watching. "I missed you. Can we walk?" We walked through the garden, Vera chattering about school and soccer practice, while my hand closed around the small burner phone in my pocket. Ancient model, probably pulled from a drawer of obsolete technology. Untraceable. Unmonitored. "How long?" I asked quietly. How long have you known this house is dangerous?" Vera's bright smile faltered. She looked up at me with eyes too old for 14. "Since I was 9, she said. "I heard Grandpa yelling at you through the bedroom door. Then he came out smiling like nothing happened. I started paying attention after that." 5 years. This child had been cataloging her grandfather's dual nature for 5 years. "Does anyone else know?" I asked. "No, Dad doesn't see it. He thinks Grandpa's perfect. Mom left when I was 6, she saw it, but nobody believed her either. Conrad's ex-wife. I'd forgotten her in the blur of Arthur's approved relationships. She'd left quietly, and I'd accepted Arthur's explanation about incompatibility without question. She was 14. She'd been protecting me. I wasn't completely alone. The phone's charged. Vera said normal volume returning. I put my number in already. Just text when you need me. She hugged me again, fierce and quick, then ran back toward the house before anyone could question the length of our conversation. I stood in the garden holding a lifeline I didn't know existed. That evening, I slid the burner phone deep into the lining of my winter coat, where Arthur would never think to search. He was meticulous about checking my purse, my car, my bedroom. But winter coats lived in the hall closet undisturbed until first snow. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that resembled hope, not the naive kind, but the tactical variety. A protected communication channel, a witness who loved me without conditions, a child who saw through her grandfather's flawless mask years before I did. The pieces were gathering. I just didn't know how little time I had left to use them. Time ran out at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. The garage doors wouldn't open locked from the outside security cameras blacked out, and I had exactly 60 seconds before Arthur realized I was trying to leave. September 23rd, the date circled in Arthur's ledger with heavy ink. The night I'd been preparing for since I found his planning notebook in the wine cellar safe. I'd packed a bag 3 days ago, hidden it in the truck bed under a tarp, changed into jeans and hiking boots instead of the silk nightgown Arthur preferred. Watched him take his sleeping medication at 10:30 and waited 30 minutes for it to take effect. But he'd been faster. Garage doors locked externally with industrial padlock. Fire alarm bypassed, red light dead. Security cameras disabled, feeds cut. He'd built a tomb and sealed me inside it. Except Arthur had made one critical miscalculation. 3 months ago, before he'd confiscated my car keys and restricted my driving, I'd hidden a spare truck key under the rear axle frame held in place with magnetic case. An old journalism trick from covering stories in bad neighborhoods where you might need to run fast. I dropped to the concrete floor and crawled beneath the truck. My fingers found the magnetic case exactly where I'd left it. The spare key was still inside. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and put the transmission in reverse. The rolling metal shutter buckled inward as I hit it at 15 miles per hour. Metal screamed against metal. The rear window shattered. Then I was through shutter hanging in twisted pieces, backing into the circular driveway with the truck bed smoking. I shifted into drive and floored the accelerator. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. My heartbeat stayed controlled. But my mind was calculating if Arthur had locked the garage he'd planned for other contingencies. Escape wasn't safety. It was walking into the second trap. I hit the main road doing 60. Rocky Mountain Highway 7 stretched ahead, 2-lane pass, cutting through dense evergreen forest switchbacks carved into granite cliffs. The route I'd driven 1,000 times in daylight. At night, in a storm. It was suicide, even with working brakes. The brake pedal felt wrong. I tested it lightly. Spongy resistance. Not dead, but dying. I pressed harder. The pedal sank toward the floor. Nothing. He'd cut the lines. Not severed completely, that would have been obvious when I first drove away. He'd scored them partially so the brake fluid would leak slowly, pressure dropping with each application until the system failed completely on the mountain switchbacks where I'd need them most. Trap within trap within trap. Severe storm hit as I climbed into the mountains. Violent wind shook the truck. Rain fell in sheets so thick the headlights barely penetrated 10 feet. Absolute darkness pressed against the windows. Then I saw them. 3 black SUVs materialized behind me, high beams flooding my mirrors. The dashboard speaker crackled to life. Pre-installed receiver I'd never noticed. Arthur's voice filled the cabin, intimate as a lover's whisper. "Run, my love. Let's see how far the old mouse can run." The lead SUV accelerated and rammed my rear bumper. My truck lurched forward. I fought the wheel, struggling to keep tires on wet pavement. The speedometer climbed 40, 50, 60 miles per hour on a road designed for 30. I tried the brakes again. The pedal hit the floor with a soft hydraulic sigh. Nothing. The second SUV pulled alongside chrome grille, massive in my peripheral vision. It swerved, right metal grinding as it forced me toward the cliff edge. 6 inches of asphalt separated my tires from a 300-foot drop into darkness. The third SUV moved to my left, boxing me completely. I had no brakes, no escape route. and a husband who'd spent 14 months planning this exact moment. Through the rain and wind, I caught a glimpse of the lead SUV's driver, professional calm, executing a contract, not passion, business. Arthur had hired professionals to make his wife's death look like a tragic accident on a stormy mountain road. Vera's face flashed in my mind, 14 years old, still believing her grandfather was a good man. That thought made me fight. I cut the wheel hard left. The truck clipped the third SUV's front quarter panel and spun. For 3 seconds, I was weightless, suspended between physics and fate. Then the truck left the road, plunged over the embankment, and flipped. The world became a kaleidoscope of shattering glass and screaming metal. Gravity reversed. The steering wheel slammed into my ribs. Something warm trickled down my forehead. Impact. The truck crashed into a pine tree 60 feet below the road driver's side, crumpling like paper. My head snapped forward into the deployed airbag. The engine died. Glass exploded inward. Freezing rain poured through the broken windshield. I couldn't move my left leg. I pulled at it, pinned beneath twisted dashboard metal and collapsed door frame. No pain yet shock was handling that, but the position was wrong. Bent at an angle, legs don't naturally bend. Above on the ridge, 3 sets of headlights came to a synchronized stop. 3 SUV doors slammed open in perfect sequence. Heavy boots crunched gravel. Flashlight beams began sweeping the tree line, methodical as a grid search. I hung upside down in absolute darkness truck cabin, crushed around me, blood running from my hairline into my eyes. My left leg completely pinned. My right hand found the seatbelt release. It clicked, but the belt stayed jammed. The flashlight beams moved closer, sweeping downslope toward the wreckage. I thought of Vera hiding that burner phone in my coat pocket, whispering that she'd known this house was dangerous since she was 9, protecting her grandmother because no one else would. I couldn't let her grow up with wolves. The flashlight beams reached the pine trees 30 feet above my position. "Down here," someone called. Male voice, professional detachment. "Vehicle located, checking for survivors." I stopped pulling at my leg and went completely still. Let them think I was dead. Let them get close. Then we'd see who was hunting whom. They thought I was dead. I used those 30 seconds well. I dragged myself through the shattered driver's window, left leg useless, every inch of forest floor, bought with broken glass, cutting into my palms. The leg wasn't broken. I'd felt compound fractures during a 1996 construction site collapse investigation, knew the particular wrongness of severed bone. This was different. Severe soft tissue damage, maybe torn ligaments. Painful as hell, but survivable if I kept moving. I crawled. Not dramatic movie crawling where the hero maintains perfect form. Real crawling elbows dragging through mud face pressed into decomposing pine needles, swallowing blood from where my forehead had split against the steering wheel. Unglamorous, unromanticized. The kind of movement that strips away everything except the animal need to survive. Behind me, flashlight beams swept the tree line in systematic grid patterns. "Vehicles empty." Someone called. Male voice, professional. Driver's door crushed inward, blood on the airbag. She couldn't have gone far. "Spread out," another voice answered. "Thermal scan shows residual heat signature moving northeast. She's on foot." I processed the tactical reality the only way I knew how, methodically. They couldn't call police. If I died out here, it was a clean accident woman with failing mental health crashes during mountain storm. Body found days later. Tragic, but explainable. But if they found me alive, they'd have to finish the job. Probably the syringe Arthur had mentioned in his ledger. Quick clinical leaves minimal trace in autopsy if anyone bothered to look. The forest was safer than capture. I dragged myself deeper into the undergrowth. Thick brush tore at my coat. Rain poured through the canopy in freezing sheets. My hands went numb after the first 100 yards. My legs screamed protest with every movement. I kept moving. Drag. Breathe. Drag. Don't think about the cold. Drag. Don't think about the blood. Drag. Through the rain, amber light. A structure in the middle of nowhere. Not vehicle headlights, those moved. Swept, searched. This was stationary. A window glowing warm against absolute darkness. Someone had electricity in the middle of Roosevelt National Forest at 1 in the morning during a mountain storm. Someone lived out here. I changed direction, angling toward the light. The thug's flashlight beams were behind me now, sweeping west while I crawled northeast. The rain was helping, washing away blood trail, masking thermal signature, turning the forest into a maze where even professionals with expensive equipment struggled to track. 30 minutes of crawling brought me to the structure. 2-story craftsman-style log building, weathered gray by decades of mountain winters. Broad porch sagging in the middle, stone chimney dark and cold, upper window glowing with that amber light I'd seen through the trees. I pulled myself to the porch steps and looked up at a weathered wooden sign barely visible through the rain. Ingram Peak Lodge established 1952. Ingram. I was a fugitive seeking sanctuary in the dragon's abandoned lair. Absolute crushing irony. Arthur's family property, the first resort his father Richard had built before expanding into the empire that became Ingram Summit Resorts, abandoned decades ago when newer, more profitable properties opened, forgotten, left to rot in the forest. Except someone was inside. I had 2 choices: freeze to death on the porch or force the door. I chose the door. The lock was ancient, corroded. I used a rock from the porch to smash the mechanism. The door swung inward with a groan of warped wood and rusted hinges. Freezing air rushed out. The smell of old wood-damp stone and something else, coffee. Recent coffee. Someone lived here. Not just existed, but maintained routines, made warm beverages, occupied the space with deliberate intention. The interior was dark except for ambient moonlight filtering through dirty windows. I could make out shapes, massive stone fireplace furniture, arranged with meticulous precision despite decades of abandonment. Everything positioned exactly as if the lodge still operated. I pulled myself across the threshold and collapsed onto warped hardwood floors. The upper window light, the amber glow I'd followed through the forest, abruptly cut out the moment I stepped inside. Someone had been watching, waiting, and just killed the light. "I know who he sends here," a voice said from the absolute blackness deeper in the hall. Old voice, weathered, masculine, not threatening exactly, but testing, measuring. But he's never sent an injured woman on foot through a mountain storm before. I tried to stand. My leg buckled. I stayed on the floor, blood dripping onto century-old floorboards, freezing rain still soaking through my coat. "Who are you?" I asked first. Something mechanical clicked above me, a remote relay switching lights. The room stayed dark, but I heard the distinctive sound of modern electronics in an ancient structure. Motion sensors, remote lighting systems, surveillance equipment. Whoever lived here had been preparing for visitors. "I know who Arthur Ingram sends to this lodge." The voice continued from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. Lawyers, investigators, real estate assessors, sometimes contractors to demolish what's left of his father's legacy. They all come during business hours. They all arrive in expensive vehicles. They all carry clipboards and take photographs and leave before dark. Footsteps creaked across the ceiling, slow, deliberate, circling. You arrived bleeding, crawling hunted. So here's my question and answer carefully because I have a shotgun and very little patience for Arthur Ingram's games. Are you running from him or are you one of his players? I looked up at the darkness where the voice originated. Tried to read intent from tone alone. Failed. "I'm his wife," I said. "And 3 hours ago he tried to kill me." Silence. Then a single overhead light clicked on, illuminating the great room in harsh LED brightness. The man who spoke from the shadows stood at the top of the staircase, thin as wire-white beard, wearing layers of thermal clothing that suggested someone who'd survived too many winters without heat. His eyes were sharp, despite age calculating, despite isolation. He held a shotgun, but it was pointed at the floor. "Judith Ingram," he said, not a question, recognition. "You know me." "I know everyone Arthur destroys." He descended 3 steps, studying my face with the intensity of someone comparing reality to memory. "The question is, do you know me?" I didn't recognize him. but the lights clicking on and off in sequence, deliberate control designed to disorient. I recognized that immediately as a test. Willard Diaz descended the last 3 stairs and waited, shotgun still pointed at the floor, watching me bleed onto his warped hardwood. "You asked if I know you," I said. "I don't, but I know what you're doing." The overhead light cut out, complete darkness. Then the lights began their pattern. Great room chandelier on-off, kitchen fluorescent on-off, hallway sconces on-off, rhythmic, mechanical, precisely timed. Exactly like Arthur's gaslighting. In the darkness between flickers, I heard it, a rocking chair moving on its own. Not wind, not settling. Someone had rigged it to motion sensors. Above me, footsteps creaked across the ceiling in deliberate sequence. Too regular, too measured. Recorded audio played through speakers or remote-activated pressure plates. Psychological scare tactics identical to the ones I'd lived inside for 32 years. Most people would scream. I stood dead center in the great room, blood dripping from my forehead onto the floor, and called out into the darkness. Motion sensors linked to battery relay system. Remote observer somewhere with line of sight or camera access. Lights controlled via wireless switches, probably from that staircase panel I saw when the chandelier was on. This is a test to see if I'll scream or run or beg. I paused, letting my voice carry through the lodge. I'm not screaming. I'm not running. I just need to bind my leg before I lose more blood. The lights stopped cycling. Complete silence. Then a single lantern clicked on at the top of the staircase, illuminating Willard Diaz properly for the first time. Thin as wire, white beard gone gray at the edges, layers of thermal clothing that suggested someone who'd survived too many Colorado winters without working heat. His eyes were sharp despite the weathering, calculating, measuring, reassessing. "You passed," he said quietly. "What did I pass?" "The sanity test." He descended slowly, setting the shotgun against the wall, but keeping it within reach. "Arthur sends people here sometimes. Lawyers, investigators, real estate assessors. They come during daylight with legal documents and court orders. But 3 times over 18 years, he's sent others. Others, women." Willard pulled a first aid kit from beneath a dust-covered sideboard. Confused, disoriented, looking for help. Arthur would call ahead, anonymous tip, about a disturbed woman wandering the forest. "Please check the old lodge." I'd test them the same way I just tested you. They all screamed. They all ran. They all confirmed exactly what Arthur needed them to confirm. They were unstable, unreliable, crazy. The first 2 women, I breathed. I don't know their names. I never asked. But I watched them get collected by psychiatric transport vehicles within hours. He knelt beside me, examining my leg with the efficiency of someone who'd handled field medicine before. "You're the first one who called out the technical specifications instead of screaming. How long have you been watching me?" Willard pulled gauze and antiseptic from the kit. "I've intercepted Arthur's surveillance servers for 3 years. Every camera he installed in your house I could access. I know you aren't crazy. I've watched you document, catalog, test your own memory, reconstruct conversations with journalistic precision. For the first time in weeks, I was sitting across from someone who believed I was sane. That simple fact felt like oxygen. My question," Willard continued, wrapping my leg with practiced efficiency, "is whether you have the stomach to accept that you're sane. Because that means accepting you were married to a monster for 32 years. No delusion to hide behind. No comfortable alternative where you misunderstood or overreacted. Just raw truth. He's been systematically destroying you since the day you signed that prenuptial agreement." I looked at this stranger who'd been watching me through stolen camera feeds, protecting women he'd never met by testing their sanity with the same weapons used to destroy them. "I already know what he is," I said. "I need help stopping him." Willard tied off the gauze and sat back on his heels. "Then we should talk in the kitchen. You're going to want to sit down for what I'm about to show you." 1 hour later, I sat at a scarred wooden table under harsh fluorescent light, while Willard Diaz told me how Arthur Ingram's family had destroyed his life. "Former Colorado State Resort Safety Inspector," he said, pouring instant coffee into chipped mugs. 2005, I documented over 200 code violations at Ingram Summit Properties, structural failures, inadequate fire suppression, worker safety hazards. I filed official reports, started the whistleblowing process. They committed you. 8 months in a private psychiatric facility owned by Arthur's father's investment network. When I got out, my credentials were gone. Inspector's license revoked, professional certification stripped, legal identity basically erased. He smiled without humor. Arthur's father taught him well. But you survived. I survived. And I came here to the first property Richard Ingram ever built, the one Arthur was too sentimental to demolish. I've lived 18 years in this lodge, systematically intercepting, logging, and archiving 3 generations of Ingram family crimes. He pulled a rugged USB drive from his jacket and slid it across the table. Building permits falsified, safety inspections bribed, witness statements from injured workers, financial records showing systematic fraud, court documents from civil suits settled under NDA. I've held this archive for 18 years. I stared at the drive. Why didn't you use it? No legal standing. I'm a ghost. A man who doesn't officially exist can't file charges or testify in court. Any evidence I present gets dismissed as conspiracy theory from a mentally ill hermit living in the woods. He pushed the drive closer. But you have standing. You're his wife. You're a former investigative journalist. You have credibility, legal access, and most importantly, you're already inside his system. 18 years, 3 generations, legal standing. I had it all. I gripped the USB drive and looked into Willard's weathered eyes. Do you know which FBI agent is currently building the securities fraud case against Ingram Summit Resorts? Willard's eyes widened for the first time. There's an active investigation. I smiled the cold, calculated smile of a journalist who just confirmed her working theory. The lead agent's name is Neville Finch. He was my research intern in 1998. I taught him how to build evidence chains that prosecutors can't ignore, and I'm about to hand him the case of his career. Willard stared at me across the table. Then he smiled genuinely for the first time. At dawn, I stood by the lodge window holding Vera's burner phone to the glass, searching for the weakest thread of cell signal that might confirm what I already suspected. The storm had passed overnight, leaving Roosevelt National Forest wrapped in gray mist. Morning light filtered through pine branches like gauze. My leg throbbed where Willard had wrapped it, but the bleeding had stopped. Small victories. One bar of signal appeared in the upper right corner of the screen, weak but enough. I opened the encrypted browser Vera had installed and navigated to the federal court docket database, the kind of search I used to run every morning when I was still Judith Brennan, investigative journalist, back when my byline meant something. Search parameters, Ingram Summit Resorts, sealed investigations, corporate fraud, securities violations. The screen loaded slowly over the weak connection, then results appeared. United States versus Ingram Summit Resorts, LLC. Case filed under seal. January 15th, 2023. 8 months ago. Status active investigation. Charges pending. Securities fraud, wire fraud, investor misrepresentation. Lead investigator, Special Agent Neville Finch, FBI Economic Crimes Unit, Denver Field Office. I read the name 3 times to be certain. Neville Finch. Special Agent Neville Finch, 43 years old, according to the FBI directory, appeared in the federal docket as lead investigator, the same intern I'd trained in evidence methodology at the Denver Post in 1998. The young man who'd shown up for his first day, wearing an oversized suit and carrying a notebook he'd already half filled with questions. I'd taught him everything I knew: how to build evidence chains that prosecutors couldn't break, how to document sources so thoroughly that defense attorneys had nothing to attack, how to recognize the difference between correlation and causation, and most importantly, the best evidence is what a criminal creates to protect himself. 25 years later, he was using those exact techniques to build a case against my husband. I wasn't starting from zero. I was joining an investigation already in progress. The pieces were gathering Willard's 18-year archive, an active FBI case, and a mentor-student connection 25 years in the making. Before I tell you what happened when I made that first call, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think the FBI will believe me, or B, if you think they'll see me as the unstable woman Arthur described. Add Y in 5 to 10 words. Quick note, some details ahead are dramatized for narrative impact, but the lesson is what matters here. I stood at that window for 10 minutes, phone in hand, watching mist burn off the forest. Then I descended to the living room where Willard had set up a charging station powered by the lodge's solar battery bank. "Making the call?" he asked. "Not to Finch, not yet." I scrolled through the contacts I'd memorized over 32 years of marriage. I need leverage first. I need someone on the inside who wants out as badly as I do. I dialed a number I'd committed to memory 28 years ago. Desmond Travers answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. No surprise in his voice, no confusion, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from waiting for something inevitable. Desmond Travers, 52, had been Arthur's personal corporate attorney for 12 years. I'd memorized his private cell the day Arthur hired him, because investigative journalists memorize everything that might become useful later. "You know who this is," I said. "Judith Ingram, calling from a number I don't recognize, which means you're either very careful or very desperate." "Both." A pause. Background noise suggested he was in a car alone, driving somewhere he could talk freely. "I assume Arthur thinks you're dead," Desmond said. "For now." "Good. That gives us maybe 48 hours before he confirms otherwise and starts moving assets." "Us." He'd said us. "Why would you help me?" I asked. "Because Arthur's been blackmailing me for 6 years over a minor escrow accounting slip I made in 2011. Nothing criminal, just enough regulatory violation to threaten my bar license if he reported it. I've been his captive attorney ever since." His voice was flat clinical. "I've watched him destroy 3 marriages, institutionalize 2 business partners, and systematically loot investor capital. I've documented everything because I knew eventually someone would offer me a way out. I can offer federal immunity," I said, "through FBI Special Agent Neville Finch, active securities fraud investigation. You deliver complete testimony about Ingram Summit's asset structure, offshore accounts, shell corporations, fraudulent filings, everything." 3 seconds of silence. "And in exchange, you walk away clean, new bar license in a different state if needed, witness protection if you want it, but most importantly, you're free." I heard him exhale slowly. "How do I know you can deliver federal immunity?" "Because Neville Finch was my research intern at the Denver Post. I taught him everything he knows about building prosecutorial evidence chains, and I'm about to hand him the biggest case of his career." Another pause, longer this time. 48 hours, Desmond said. "That's how long before Arthur realizes you survived and starts altering account structures. Can you get immunity paperwork executed in 48 hours? 48 hours. That's all the time I had." "Yes," I said. "Then we have a deal." He hung up. I lowered the phone, my hand steadier than it had been in years. Desmond Travers would deliver Arthur's complete financial architecture within 48 hours, every offshore account, every shell corporation, every hidden asset transfer that had built and maintained the resort empire. The attorney Arthur used to construct his fortress was about to hand me the blueprint for its demolition. But 48 hours meant Arthur would discover I'd survived the mountain crash long before the evidence reached federal hands. He'd move assets, destroy records, disappear witnesses. The window was narrow and closing fast. Willard watched me from across the room. "You look different than you did 6 hours ago," he said. "Different how?" "Like someone who just remembered she used to be dangerous." I smiled, not the performance smile I'd worn for 32 years, the real one. "I didn't remember," I said. "I just stopped pretending I'd forgotten." The clock was running. The clock started counting the moment Desmond agreed, but I wasn't waiting for time to run out. I was using every second it gave me. That afternoon, a man I'd last seen in a supermarket parking lot stood on the lodge porch with his hands visibly empty, holding a thick manila envelope. He'd tracked the escape route by monitoring Arthur's own tactical team. Their radio frequency was unencrypted amateur mistake for professionals. When Arthur's termination order arrived on his phone at 2 in the morning, Theron had 6 hours to decide which side of the line he stood on. He drove to the lodge. Willard positioned himself in the doorway, gripping an iron poker from the fireplace. His body language said he'd survived 18 years in the wilderness by treating every visitor as a potential threat. Theron Chambers, 47, was the private investigator who'd tailed me for 30 months the gray sedan, with the distinctive fender scratch, the baseball cap pulled low, the phone angled for surveillance photography. Now he stood on rotting porch boards with his palms raised, showing he wasn't armed. "Mrs. Ingram," he said, "I need to give you something before your husband kills me." Willard didn't lower the poker. "Talk from there," I said through the screen door. Theron set the manila envelope on the top porch step and took 3 steps backward. 2.5 years of surveillance documentation. The first year was external-only standard matrimonial work. Arthur brought me on 18 months ago and added interior access when the institutionalization plan started. Everything from that point forward is high-definition authenticated, time-stamped. Why? Because I intercepted the termination order. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. Encrypted message sent at 2:47 a.m. this morning. Instructions to eliminate me as a loose end once your death was confirmed. He never planned to pay a final invoice, just erase me the same way he was erasing you. I opened the screen door and retrieved the envelope. Inside, external hard drive, heavy and professional grade. And on top, a single photograph printed on photo paper, night vision footage, timestamp visible, September 23, 2023, 11:43 p.m. Arthur at his desk, blue fountain pen in hand, writing on what looked like medical authorization form. The angle was perfect. Camera must have been positioned in his home office, probably hidden in a book spine on the shelf behind him. I could read the handwriting: Increased Chemical Restraint Protocol, J.I., his signature below, blue ink, legally binding. "You had a camera in his private office," I said. "He hired me to surveil you. I surveilled everyone. Professional habit." Theron shifted his weight. "That footage is admissible. High definition. Authenticated timestamps. Documented chain of custody. Everything a prosecutor needs." I looked at the photograph again. Blue fountain pen. Arthur always used blue ink for documents he intended to hold up in court. I'd watched him sign 32 years of contracts agreements, authorizations, always blue, never black. "This is the 4th pillar," I said quietly. Willard looked at me. "4th. Your 18-year archive, Desmond's financial records, my documentation, and now this visual proof of premeditated chemical assault with legally binding signature." I looked up at Theron. 4 independent evidence sources, each one cross-verifying the others. 4 pillars of evidence, each one delivered by someone Arthur betrayed, the architect of his own destruction. "I need one more," I said. Theron nodded slowly. "The 5th pillar proves intent. The others prove action, but you need something that shows he planned this systematically over time. Forethought, malice aforethought." "I know," I said, "and I think I know where it's coming from." By evening, the lodge had transformed into something I recognized: an evidence war room. Documents covered the kitchen table in organized stacks. Willard's laptop displayed the surveillance footage in split-screen: Arthur signing authorizations, Arthur meeting with Dr. Hollis, Arthur adjusting medication bottles in our home medicine cabinet when he thought no one was watching. I was cataloging everything according to federal rules of evidence when Vera's encrypted app pinged. Incoming call. Vivica's name on the screen. I answered. "Mom." Her voice was trembling but controlled. "I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." I audited every corporate disclosure I signed for Dad over the past 5 years, cross-referenced with personal legal documents. I found it. She paused. "I signed your secondary involuntary commitment verification. It was buried in a 400-page omnibus corporate health restructuring package. I didn't read it. I just signed where Dad told me to sign. Silence. I didn't come to apologize. Vivica continued, her voice steadying. I came to ask, what evidence do you need? The shift in her tone was so familiar it hurt. Lawyer's precision, strategic thinking, the investigative mind she'd inherited from me finally turning in the right direction. What do you have access to? I asked. Full administrative access to Ingram Summit's internal mainframe, financial transfers, email archives, corporate filings, everything Dad thought was secure behind executive passwords. I checked my watch, calculated the timeline. How long before security logs flag an unusual data extraction? 90 minutes if I'm careful, maybe 2 hours if I root through the backup server. 90 minutes. The extraction window was closing before it even opened. Start with email archives. I said, search parameters, my name, conservatorship, psychiatric medical authorization. Download everything to encrypted drive. Then financial transfers, any movement over $50,000 in the past 18 months. Focus on shell companies and offshore accounts. What about Conrad? Vivica asked. He'll see the server activity logs. Conrad absolutely cannot know until the download completes. His judgment is still chemically compromised. Dad's been dosing him the same way he dosed me probably for years. Until that clears his system, we can't trust his reactions. Understood, I heard keyboard clicks in the background. Mom, Don't, I said. Not yet. Get the evidence first. Process guilt later. Right now I need the lawyer you trained to be not the daughter seeking absolution. A pause. Then, extraction starting now. I'll send encrypted file links as sections complete. She hung up. I set the phone down and looked at Willard across the war room table. Theron's surveillance footage queued on the laptop. Desmond's immunity deal confirmed via encrypted email. Vivica's mainframe extraction running on countdown timer. 4 independent evidence sources, each one cross-verifying the others. You said you needed 5 pillars, Willard said quietly. I thought of Vera, 14 years old, carrying that encrypted burner phone everywhere. The child who'd known her grandfather was dangerous since she was 9, the one who'd been protecting me without my knowledge. I think I know where the 5th one is coming from, I told him, and it's going to be the one that proves premeditated intent beyond any shadow of doubt. Willard studied my face. You're building a federal RICO case. I'm building something prosecutors can't ignore and defense attorneys can't break. I pulled up the federal rules of evidence on the laptop. 5 independent pillars, each authenticated through different sources, all pointing to the same systematic criminal enterprise. When do we contact the FBI? When the 5th pillar arrives, not before. The 5th pillar wasn't just evidence, it was a detonator, and I had 3 hours to build the weapon before dawn. Willard and I transformed the lodge's main room into a war room at 8 o'clock. Document stacks covered every surface, the scarred wooden table, the stone hearth, even the warped floorboards near the windows. He pulled federal evidence templates from his laptop files he'd been preparing for 18 years in case someone finally had the legal standing to use them. Federal rules of evidence, he said, opening a document. Every piece needs authentication, chain of custody, admissibility standards. I know, I said. I covered enough trials to know how prosecutors think. We organized everything into 5 tiers. Tier 1, Willard's 18-year archive. Building permits falsified. Safety inspections bribed. Witness statements from injured workers. Business records exception under FRE 8036 documents created in the regular course of business, self-authenticating if properly maintained. Tier 2. Theron's surveillance footage. 2.5 years of high-definition documentation. Photos with embedded metadata. Videos with authenticated timestamps. Arthur signing medical authorizations. Arthur meeting with Dr. Hollis. Arthur adjusting medication bottles in our home medicine cabinet when he thought no one was watching. Tier 3. My secret recordings. Every conversation I documented since February. Arthur discussing the conservatorship plan with Iris. Arthur coaching Vivica on legal terminology. Party admission exception under FRE 801D2 statements, made by an opposing party admissible as non-hearsay. Tier 4 Vivica's mainframe extraction, corporate emails, financial transfers, shell company structures, screenshots with hash verification to prove they hadn't been altered. Tier 5 Arthur's 1978 commitment file, the yellowed papers showing how Richard Ingram had institutionalized his own son. Ancient document exception under FRE 800-316 documents over 20 years old, authenticated by appearance and circumstances. Each tier cross-referenced the others. Willard's archive showed property violations. Theron's surveillance showed Arthur covering them up. My recordings captured Arthur discussing systematic fraud. Vivica's data proved the financial mechanisms, and the 1978 file established the generational pattern, father to son, institutional abuse, as family tradition. At 9:30, while cross-referencing Tier 4, I found it. Not just embezzlement, not just investor fraud, a complete parallel accounting system dating back to 1985. Every resort had 2 sets of books, public records filed with the SEC showing modest but steady profits, and hidden ledgers buried in Vivica's extraction under encrypted file names showing massive cash siphoning funneled through shell companies in Bermuda and the Caymans. I did the math 3 times to be certain. $87 million, stolen systematically over 38 years. This triggers mandatory RICO prosecution, I said quietly. Willard looked up from his laptop. Federal. They won't just want Arthur, they'll want to dismantle the entire enterprise, seize every property, freeze every account. The resort empire doesn't survive this. Arthur hadn't built Ingram Summit Resorts. He'd built a money laundering operation disguised as a legitimate business. Willard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then froze. His face drained of color. "Judith," he said slowly. "My contact at Ingram Summit just sent a message. Arthur left the Denver office 2 hours ago. He's driving toward Aspen, ETA 1 o'clock. I checked my watch, 11:15. Less than 2 hours. Keep working, I said. We finished the cross-referencing. At 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Vera's encrypted app, incoming video file. Timestamp 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes ago. I opened it. The video was shaky, clearly recorded on a phone held low and hidden. Vera must have positioned it in Arthur's home office, probably propped against books on a shelf. The angle showed Arthur at his desk phone on speaker. His voice filled my earbuds. "The lodge outside Aspen. Yes, that one. I want it handled before dawn. Make it look like faulty wiring. And if anyone's inside..." He paused. No witnesses. A male voice responded tinny through the speakerphone. "Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures. We'll handle it." "Good. Torch it at 4 a.m. I'll be there by 1 o'clock to confirm the location." The video ended. A text from Vera appeared beneath it. "Grandma, he knows where you are. Get out now." My hands shook as I replayed the video. Arthur wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to verify the target for hired arsonists. The timeline was surgical, arrive at 1 a.m., to scout the property leave before his thugs torched it at 4 a.m. with us inside. 2 hours before he reached Aspen. 3 hours before we burned alive. "Willard," I said. He looked up. I handed him the phone, watched his face as he played the video. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." "Wait." I pulled up the property records on his laptop. "You said this lodge belonged to a friend. What's the actual ownership structure?" He navigated to the county assessor's database, entered the parcel number. The screen loaded. Property owner Summit Holdings, LLC. Willard's face went pale. "Summit Holdings," he whispered. "That's one of Arthur's shell companies, from Vivica's list." I stared at the screen, then looked at Willard. "How long have you been here without Arthur knowing?" 18 years. He set the laptop down slowly. "I found the lodge abandoned in 2005. The property taxes were delinquent for 6 years. Arthur had forgotten it existed after his father died. I paid the back taxes anonymously through a third party. He never connected the payment to a person. Until now. Until you arrived." His voice was flat. I have a motion sensor on the access road. Someone drove past 3 times last week, not hikers, not rangers. Pattern surveillance. Arthur's property management firm must have flagged recent activity on a dormant asset and reported it up the chain. So Arthur hadn't always known. He'd learned recently, days ago, maybe less. The lodge hadn't always been a trap. It had just become one. "How long do we have?" I asked, based on what Vera's message said, less than 2 hours. The lodge's motion sensor lights outside suddenly flared on. Both of us froze. I moved to the window. Through the glass, nothing. Just wind-blown pine trees casting shadows in the floodlight. Then Willard whispered behind me, "Those lights are on a 5-minute timer. Someone just drove past the access road." Arthur was early. I looked at the evidence spread across the table. 5 tiers of documentation. 45 years of crimes. Richard Ingram's institutional abuse in 1978. Arthur's systematic fraud from 1985, forward 3 generations of betrayal, weaponized into a federal indictment. Willard was already moving loading files onto 3 USB drives with practiced efficiency. He handed me one, pocketed another, placed the third inside a FedEx envelope pre-addressed to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Denver. "Whatever happens," he said, "this gets mailed at dawn." I slipped the USB into my jacket pocket. Then I walked to the window and looked down the mountain road. Headlights cut through the darkness half a mile away, moving slowly, deliberately. Not the speed of someone lost or uncertain, the speed of someone who knew exactly where he was going and wanted to arrive quietly. Arthur was coming. And for the first time in 45 years, not 32 but 45, because this war started the day Richard Ingram locked his 17-year-old son in a psychiatric ward, I was ready to face him. Not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the investigative journalist who just documented his entire criminal enterprise and was about to hand federal prosecutors the case that would dismantle everything he'd built. The final confrontation would begin in 90 minutes. The war isn't coming, I thought. It's here. The headlights stopped half a mile down the mountain road. Arthur was waiting, calculating. But I had 30 minutes before he moved, and I planned to use every second. I dial the number I memorized in 1998, the one I swore I'd never use, and at 12:47 a.m. on September 24th, I execute my probable cause. The phone rings once. Finch. FBI Special Agent Neville Finch, White Collar Crime Division, answers his personal cell at 12:47 a.m., the number I memorized 25 years ago when he investigated one of Arthur's early business partners, and I was still a journalist who knew which federal agents to cultivate. Special Agent Finch, this is Judith Ingram. I have evidence of ongoing RICO enterprise with imminent destruction of evidence. Are you recording this call? A pause. Not surprise, assessment. I am now, proceed. No questions about why Arthur Ingram's wife was calling at midnight. No skepticism. He'd been waiting for this call. Tier 1 evidence 18-year archive of building code violations, falsified permits, and witness statements from injured workers. Business records exception, Federal Rule of Evidence 800-36, maintained in regular course of business by former state safety inspector. I spoke the way I used to write precise, clinical, impossible to misinterpret. Tier 2, 2.5 years of authenticated surveillance footage showing systematic medication tampering, covert meetings with medical professionals, and physical alteration of household timekeeping devices. Chain of custody established through licensed private investigator metadata chains intact. Tier 3 direct party admissions captured via secret audio recordings. Subject discussing conservatorship fraud, investor misrepresentation, and systematic psychological manipulation. Party admission exception FRE 801D2. Finch cut in. Ma'am, you've outlined sufficient probable cause for emergency federal arrest warrant tonight. I need to know, can you maintain operational security for 90 minutes while tactical assets deploy? I looked through the lodge window at those distant headlights still motionless in the darkness. I survived 32 years in his house, Agent Finch, I said. 90 minutes is nothing. Understood. Stay on this line. Do not engage the subject. We're inbound. He didn't hang up. I heard him issuing rapid commands to someone else: tactical deployment, GPS coordinates, federal warrant authorization. The headlights down the road began moving again, slowly, deliberately. Arthur was coming. I ended the call and walked back inside where Willard was making final adjustments to the PA system he'd rigged while I was on the phone. "It's ready," he said. "Vera's video cued to every speaker in the building. The moment he walks through that door, he hears his own voice. FBI tactical deploys in 90 minutes, I said. He'll be here in 13. 13 minutes early, Arthur never followed predictable timelines. Willard and I moved through the lodge with practiced efficiency. Evidence gone already secured in the FedEx envelope and 2 backup USB drives. Furniture repositioned to clear sightlines. My position, far end of the great room back to the stone fireplace, nowhere to retreat. When Arthur walked in, I wanted him to see exactly what I'd become. At 1 o'clock, tactical flashlights swept the lodge perimeter. Not FBI Arthur's people doing exactly what Vera's video had shown them doing. Thermal imaging, perimeter security. Then I heard the distinctive sound of a luxury SUV engine. Doors opening. Boots on gravel. Arthur entered first. Black overcoat tailored and expensive, dress shoes clicking on warped hardwood floors, and there, visible in his coat pocket, a syringe filled with clear liquid. Not even hidden. He'd brought it to finish what the mountain crash hadn't. Behind him, Conrad, my son, face drained of color but still following his father like a shadow. And 2 men I recognized from Vera's video, the hired security Arthur thought would help him clean up this mess. Marcus Keller, late 30s, with an ex-military build, scanned the room with professional efficiency. Derek Osman, early 40s, and the thermal imaging specialist who'd confirmed our heat signatures, positioned himself near the door. Arthur stopped in the center of the great room, looked around at the cleared furniture, the empty tables, the missing evidence. Then his eyes found me. I stood perfectly still at the far end of the room. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't afraid of him, and he saw it. Something flickered across his flawless mask. Uncertainty, recalculation. Even your own blood abandoned you, Arthur said, voice smooth as poison. You're alone in my property with no witnesses, no leverage. I'm not alone, Arthur, I said. And this isn't your property anymore, it's a crime scene. His smile turned cold. You think you've won because you found some old documents, because you convinced our unstable son to turn against his own father. Conrad flinched at the word unstable. Arthur took a step forward. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you've documented, it doesn't matter. You're a 61-year-old woman with documented mental health issues. I'm a respected businessman with 32 years of community standing. Who do you think they'll believe? I smiled. The real smile. The one that used to unsettle sources who thought they were smarter than me. Let's find out, I said. From the lodge rafters, the PA system crackled to life. Static. Then Arthur's own voice filled every corner of the building, crystal clear and unmistakable. At the lodge outside Aspen. Yes, that one. I want it handled before dawn. Make it look like faulty wiring. And if anyone's inside, no witnesses. Arthur's face went rigid. The recording continued. The hired man's voice. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures. We'll handle it. Marcus and Derek exchanged glances. Their hands moved toward concealed weapons. But not toward me. Toward Arthur. Conrad's eyes met mine across the room, not with hatred, but with something worse: recognition that his father was a monster. Arthur's recorded voice echoed through the speakers. Good. Torch it at 4 a.m. I'll be there by 1 o'clock to confirm the location. The PA system cut to silence. In that silence, I heard something else. Distant. Growing louder. The thrum of rotor blades cutting through mountain air. FBI tactical was early. The helicopter rotor blades faded into background noise as the PA system crackled again. This time, a second recording. Older Arthur's voice. Younger, but the cruelty identical. Marcus and Derek held their positions, weapons half drawn but uncertain. Arthur's mask had slipped, but he was already recalculating, looking for exits, for leverage. Then Willard's vintage PA system delivered the next blow. Static cleared. A conversation from 1995 audio quality suggesting hidden microphone voices echoing with the hollow resonance of a large office. Arthur's voice, 28 years younger. She'll be the third. Chain it in the solitary ward at Pinebrook. If she vanishes, it's simpler for everyone. A woman's voice, Iris Gutierrez, Arthur's operations director, my former colleague. And the first two, they're still institutionalized indefinitely. The beauty of involuntary commitment is permanence. Once you're labeled unstable, every protest becomes proof of the diagnosis. I watched Arthur's face. He'd stopped breathing. The third. I'd known from his 1978 file that he'd learned institutional abuse from his father, but I hadn't known he'd perfected it. 2 women before me erased so completely I'd never heard their names. The recording cut to a new one. Different year. Arthur's voice more refined, the cruelty more practiced. 2008. I recognized the audio signature from Vivica's mainframe extraction. Arthur, speaking to someone on speakerphone, drug the children. Keep them compliant like trained dogs. They'll sign whatever papers I need. Asset transfers, ND as custody waivers. Start with low-dose benzodiazepines in their daily vitamins. Conrad especially. He asks too many questions. Conrad froze mid-breath. His skin went translucent. I watched my son's world shatter in real time, not slowly, not gradually, but with the catastrophic precision of a controlled demolition. Arthur spun toward the ceiling, scanning for the PA speakers with rabid fury. "Kill that feed," he hissed to Marcus and Derek. "Now, rip the wiring out if you have to." Neither man moved. The PA cut to static. 3 seconds of silence. Then Willard's calm voice filled every speaker. Recording 4 of 17. Shall I continue? 17. Willard had 17 recordings queued. 17 pieces of Arthur's own voice documenting systematic abuse spanning decades. Arthur's eyes found mine across the room. For the first time in 32 years, I saw genuine fear. "You did this," he said quietly. "You manipulated evidence. Fabricated recordings. You're the one who's been lying all along." I didn't respond, didn't need to. The recording spoke with Arthur's own voice. Conrad turned slowly toward his father. The movement was deliberate, controlled, like someone testing whether their body still worked after a long paralysis. "What have you been putting in my vitamins?" Conrad's voice was barely above a whisper. "The supplements you insisted I take every morning for 11 years. Arthur's expression smoothed instantly into concerned father. "Conrad, you're confused. The stress, the recordings, none of this is what you think. Your mother has been deteriorating for years. This is exactly the kind of paranoid episode. What have you been putting in my vitamins?" Arthur's silence was the most definitive answer he could have given. Conrad dropped to his knees. Not before me, not in supplication or apology, but under the crushing weight of understanding that 11 years of his life had been chemically deleted. I watched him piece it together, saw the journalist's mind he'd inherited from me finally working without chemical fog. "The board meetings," Conrad said slowly. "I can't remember half of them. Asset transfers I signed but don't recall authorizing, moving funds from Vivica's accounts, from Vera's trust, from," he looked at me, "from your pension." His hands trembled. Conrad looked at his hands, the same hands that signed away his daughter's trust funds, Vivica's house, his own mother's pension, and didn't recognize them. "I wasn't your CFO," Conrad breathed. "I was your signature machine." Arthur gestured sharply to Marcus. "Get him up. He's having a breakdown. We need to—" "Don't touch him," I said. Marcus looked at me, then at Conrad, then at Arthur. His hand stayed at his side. Arthur's voice turned cold. "I'm paying you to follow orders, not make moral judgments. You're paying us to provide security," Marcus said quietly, "not commit felony assault, and definitely not murder." Derek moved, not toward Conrad, toward Arthur. But his body language had shifted entirely, no longer hired muscle executing orders. Professional restraint aimed at containing a volatile subject. Arthur took a step backward. "This is my property," he said. "You're all trespassing. I have every legal right." Summit Holdings, LLC, I interrupted. Shell company registered in the Caymans. Vivica's mainframe extraction shows you used investor funds to purchase this lodge as a personal asset. That's securities fraud, Arthur, federal crime. Conrad pushed himself to his feet. Stood there swaying slightly, 11 years of chemical control clearing from his system in real time. Marcus stepped forward, not aggressively, just positioning himself between Conrad and Arthur. Arthur gestured at him. I gave you an order. Take your hands off me, Conrad said. The words weren't shouted, weren't aggressive, just spoken with terrifying calm, the tone of someone who'd spent 11 years in fog and finally understood why. Marcus's hand hovered 6 inches from Conrad's shoulder, frozen by that voice. The voice that carried none of the chemical compliance Arthur had cultivated, none of the trained obedience. Derek moved to Arthur's side, but his stance had changed completely. No longer protective detail guarding their employer, containment protocol, keeping the volatile subject from escalating. The helicopter rotor wash hit the lodge windows with sudden force. Through the glass, I saw them tactical flashlights forming a perimeter, FBI SWAT in full gear moving with practiced efficiency through the tree line. Arthur was surrounded by people who'd just heard exactly what he was. His own voice preserved in 17 recordings. His own son no longer chemically controlled. His own hired security no longer willing to execute murder. And federal agents closing in with arrest warrants and tactical authorization. For the first time in 45 years, Arthur Ingram had nowhere to run. The staircase creaked. Not the settling groan of an old lodge adjusting to night temperatures. This was the deliberate rhythm of someone descending with purpose. I turned from the window where FBI tactical lights had just swept across the tree line and saw my daughter. Vivica carried a leather portfolio case I recognized from Arthur's study. Her face was calm, almost serene in the firelight. Behind me, Arthur went rigid. Vivica. His voice cracked on her name. What are you doing here? She reached the bottom step and met his eyes without flinching. What I should have done years ago. The portfolio landed on the coffee table between us with a soft thud. She opened it to reveal thumb drives, printouts, what looked like original contracts bearing Arthur's signature in blue ink. Corporate records, she said. 14 properties. 18 shell companies, every falsified inspection report since 2006. She pulled out her phone, thumbs moving across the screen. And I transmitted the encryption keys to Special Agent Finch 2 hours ago while you were still in Denver. Arthur's face drained of color. You what? This wasn't a coincidence, Dad. Vivica's voice was steady, professional, the tone she used in board meetings. 3 days ago, Mom called me from a number I didn't recognize. She told me everything, the evidence, the lodge, the timeline. I contacted Agent Finch the same night. He already had warrants drafted. I gave him the encryption keys and the corporate files. He just needed to know where Arthur would be. She looked at me across the room. I got here 4 hours before you did, Mom. I came through the service trail on the north side of the property. Arthur never checks that approach. How do you watch 33 years of control evaporate in 30 seconds? Arthur looked between us, understanding finally dawning across his features. You planned this. Both of you. All 3 of us, Willard said from his position by the hallway, plus one very patient FBI agent. Something broke behind Arthur's eyes. The careful mask he'd worn for decades shattered completely, and what emerged was raw animal panic. He lunged not toward the door, not toward escape, but directly at me. His hands found my throat. The pressure was immediate, shocking, exactly what I'd engineered this entire evening to produce. Documented physical assault, filmed felony battery, the final piece of evidence that transformed this from white-collar prosecution into violent RICO enterprise. Willard moved faster than I expected for a man with a rebuilt knee. He drove his shoulder into Arthur's ribs, breaking the chokehold, sending both men crashing into the side table. Lamp, glass. The sharp crack of wood splitting. The front door exploded inward. FBI hands where we can see them. Special Agent Neville Finch led the breach team, his service weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. Behind him came Agent Ross Callahan, late 40s with the compact build of former military, and Agent Nina Bremer, evidence specialist, already photographing the scene with practiced efficiency. Arthur rolled to his knees, hands rising automatically. Blood trickled from his split lip where Willard's elbow had connected. He looked smaller, suddenly diminished, as though the physical violence had collapsed something essential in his posture. Finch holstered his weapon and produced handcuffs. "Arthur Ingram, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, aggravated assault." "I want my attorney," Arthur said. His voice was hoarse. "You'll get your call." Finch secured the cuffs with clinical precision. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Cannot afford. The irony would have made me laugh if my throat didn't ache. Bremer moved through the room, collecting the recording equipment I'd placed, cataloging the overturned furniture, photographing the red marks on my neck that would bloom into bruises by morning. Every piece of evidence tagged, numbered, preserved for trial. Vivica stood beside me, her hand finding mine. Her fingers were trembling slightly, the only sign that her composure was costing her something. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded. My voice came out rough. Perfect timing. "We've been parked on the access road for 40 minutes, Finch said, glancing at me. "Waiting for your signal." The signal had been Arthur's hands on my throat. Violent assault witnessed by 2 people captured by 4 cameras, committed by a man who'd spent 14 months claiming I was incompetent and delusional. The final contradiction that would destroy his credibility completely. Callahan and another agent lifted Arthur to his feet. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stood there with his hands cuffed behind him, staring at the floor. Then his eyes lifted, found mine. And for the first time in 32 years, I saw recognition there, not of his wife, not of the woman he'd married in 1991, but of the investigative journalist who'd brought down Silver Peak Mining in 1987. He'd underestimated what I was capable of documenting, what I was willing to sacrifice to expose the truth, what I would do to protect the people he'd hurt. "You planned everything," he said quietly, "from the beginning." I held his gaze. From the beginning, Finch guided him toward the door, Callahan flanking the other side. The breach team had already cleared the exterior tactical lights, still sweeping the perimeter, ensuring no security personnel or associates remained. At the threshold, Arthur stopped, looked back one final time. I didn't look away, didn't soften. Just stood there with my daughter beside me, my throat bruised, my evidence collected, breathing freely for the first time since I'd found that conservatorship petition in his desk 14 months ago. The door closed behind him. Engine sounds, radio chatter, red and blue lights painting the lodge windows in rotating patterns. Then silence. Vivica's hand tightened on mine. Willard limped over from where Bremer was photographing the broken table, his expression carefully neutral. "It's done," I said. My voice was barely a whisper. But outside through the window, I could see the FBI transport van pulling away down the mountain road, Arthur's silhouette visible through the rear windows, and I knew this wasn't done at all. It was just beginning. 5 months after the FBI transport van carried Arthur down the mountain, I walked through metal detectors at the U.S. District Court in Denver, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying 6 banker boxes of evidence I organized into prosecutorial perfection. The courthouse corridors smell like floor polish and recycled air. Outside, through the tall windows, media vans line the street, 3 deep satellite dishes, angled toward a gray March sky. Inside, the machinery of federal justice moves with methodical precision. Assistant U.S. Attorney Margaret Hale meets me at the security checkpoint. She's 41 Harvard Law with the kind of sharp focus that comes from winning cases most prosecutors won't touch. She reaches for one of the boxes. "The 18-quarter analysis is in box 3, I say. Desmond's immunity agreement cross-referenced to each falsified report. You've organized this better than our evidence team." Margaret shifts the box to her hip. "Judge Casper wants the authentication chain for the 1978 sanitarium commitment before we introduce it. Can you walk me through provenance? We move toward courtroom 4A, where United States versus Ingram has occupied the docket for 3 weeks. Arthur plus 6 co-conspirators, 23 counts. RICO Enterprise attempted murder, felony, poisoning, securities fraud. The entire $280 million empire frozen under federal forfeiture. I sit in the gallery directly behind the prosecution table. Not at the table itself. My bar license expired 28 years ago in 1996, when Arthur convinced me that staying home with the children was more important than maintaining my legal career. That was the year he started the first shell company, the year he needed me distracted and professionally neutralized. But Margaret turns to consult my notes every 15 minutes like clockwork. The junior prosecutors defer to my evidence mapping. Special Agent Finch, seated 2 rows back, nods when I catch his eye. I may not have a current license, but I'm architecting this entire prosecution from the second row. The gallery fills. Vivica sits beside me, her presence steady and professional. Across the aisle, I glimpse Arthur's mother, 87-years-old face, carved into lines of bewildered denial. Judge Roland Casper enters. He's 63, appointed to the U.S. District Court for Colorado in 2009, known for methodical attention to evidence authentication. We rise. The morning session brings Desmond Travers to the stand. 52-years-old Arthur's former personal corporate attorney of 12 years, testifying under the immunity deal I helped structure that night at the lodge. His suit is cheaper than he used to wear. His hands shake slightly as he's sworn in. Margaret approaches the witness box. Mr. Travers, describe your role at Ingram Summit Resorts between 2006 and 2015. Chief Financial Officer. His voice is quiet but clear. I reported directly to Arthur Ingram. During that period, did Mr. Ingram ever instruct you to falsify financial documents? Yes. Quarterly investor reports. 18 consecutive quarters from 2010 through 2014. He told me to inflate occupancy rates, hide maintenance costs, fabricate revenue projections. What happened when you questioned these instructions? Desmond's eyes find Arthur across the courtroom. He told me if I refused, I'd be next to disappear. The phrase lands like a stone in still water. Ripples of reaction spread through the gallery. I watch the jury. 2 members lean forward. One makes a note. Margaret walks Desmond through each falsified report, matching them to evidence boxes I organized by fiscal quarter. Every answer reinforces the pattern: systematic fraud, documented threats, conscious enterprise. Judge Casper reads through the counts during the afternoon session, addressing Arthur's motion to dismiss. His voice is measured, legal, precise. Count 17, attempted murder, under Title 18, Section 1111. I hear the words and realize I'm the victim named in that count. Me, Judith Ingram. Reduced to legal terminology cited in federal statute, finally believed. The courtroom continues around me, but for 10 seconds I exist in a strange pocket of vindication and grief for the woman who needed 18 months and 5 evidence tiers to be taken seriously. Judge Casper looks up from his notes. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed on all 23 counts. Defendant's motion to dismiss is denied. Arthur's shoulders drop half an inch. It's the only visible reaction he permits himself. 1 week later, I sit across from Conrad in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. Morning light filters through windows streaked with late-season snowmelt. He's been chemical-free for 5 months, and his emotions are sharp and raw in a way I haven't seen since he was a teenager. He doesn't offer empty apologies. Instead, he places a single document on the table between us, 63 pages meticulously formatted, every corporate asset transfer he executed under Arthur's influence, mapped with legal citations and reversal pathways. Vivica, seated beside me, touches the edge of the document. It took him 3 weeks to compile. 247 transactions across 16 shell companies. Conrad's voice is steady. I can't apologize for 11 years I don't remember clearly, but I can document every action I took and undo the damage systematically. Each page represents a year of his stolen life, now reclaimed one reversal at a time. I place my hand over the document covering the title page. The paper is warm from where his hands rested. Forgiveness isn't forgetting Conrad. It means moving forward with truth instead of running from it. We'll reverse everyone together. His eyes meet mine. There's recognition there, not of mother and son exactly, but of two people who speak the same language, evidence documentation, methodical repair of systematic damage. He reaches into his messenger bag and slides a second document across the table. This one handwritten, not typed, smaller, more personal. At the top in Conrad's careful architectural lettering, properties and assets mother should reclaim. Vivica leans forward. He's been working on this one alone, Mom. It's everything Dad took from you specifically across 32 years, with legal pathways to recovery. I pick up the first page. My name is written at the top, my maiden name, the one I haven't used since 1992, the one that belonged to the woman who broke the Silver Peak mining scandal before she became Mrs. Arthur Ingram. Below it, itemized with the same precision Conrad used on corporate reversals, a list of intellectual property real estate, investment accounts, and professional opportunities diverted or stolen. At the bottom of the first page in red ink, total estimated value $47 million. I look up. Conrad is watching me with an expression I can't quite read. This is who you were before him, he says quietly, and who you can be after. 2 months after Conrad handed me a map to reclaim what was stolen, I sit in a mahogany-paneled hearing room at the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, watching a different kind of restoration, the return of a man's name. Willard Diaz stands at the front of the chamber wearing a tailored charcoal suit. It's the first time I've seen him in formal clothing, the first time in 19 years he's had reason to dress for an official proceeding that might go his way. His hands rest at his sides, careful and still. Ellen Prescott, chair of the CDRA board, sits at the elevated panel table flanked by 4 other board members. She's in her late 50s, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. She lifts a document bearing the state seal. Mr. Diaz. She begins her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. The state of Colorado formally vacates all prior disciplinary actions taken against your professional license. We restore your credentials as a certified safety inspector without condition or probation. Willard's jaw tightens. He nods once. Prescott continues. Furthermore, this board acknowledges that the administrative erasure of your legal identity constituted a miscarriage of justice. We apologize on behalf of the state regulatory system. Administrative erasure. The phrase is clinical bureaucratic, but it describes 19 years of a man who couldn't rent an apartment, open a bank account, or apply for work because his name had been systematically removed from every official record Arthur Ingram could reach. Frank Garrison, CDRA Deputy Director 46, with the efficient bearing of career civil service signs, the certification documents and slides them across the table. Willard steps forward to receive them. He holds the paper in both hands, staring at the state seal embossed at the top. The seal looks exactly like the federal seal on Arthur's indictment, 2 sides of the same justice, one giving back what the other takes away. Willard doesn't speak for a full minute. When he does, his voice is rough. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a name, to exist on paper again. I'm seated in the second row, and his eyes find mine. So had I, Willard, I say quietly. So had I. He studies the certification, then folds it carefully and tucks it into his jacket pocket. As the board members gather their materials and the chamber begins to empty, Willard walks over and sits in the chair beside me. What do you plan to do with the lodge? He asks. The question surprises me, not because it's unexpected. The property is central to both our stories, but because I haven't yet articulated the answer aloud. I'm still deciding, I tell him. He nods slowly. It's the place where we both stopped hiding. Yes, I say, it is. 2 months later, on a bright July morning, I sit in my Denver apartment watching network news broadcast Arthur's sentencing. The apartment is small, minimalist, flooded with light from floor-to-ceiling windows that face east toward the mountains. I chose it specifically because it looks nothing like any house Arthur ever owned. Vera sits beside me on the sofa. She's 15 now, taller than she was 9 months ago, when this started carrying herself with a new kind of awareness. She holds my hand as the news anchor's voice fills the room. Arthur Ingram, 64, was sentenced today to 42 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for charges, including RICO conspiracy, attempted murder, securities fraud, and elder abuse. Prosecutors called it the most systematic abuse of family and institutional power in Colorado history. 42 years. Arthur will be 106 years old when released if he lives that long. I will be 93. The numbers feel like poetry, mathematical closure to 3 decades of calculated harm. The screen cuts to footage of Arthur being led from the courthouse in handcuffs, his face carefully blank. I watch without tears, without laughter, just a slow, resolute nod, like a senior editor confirming a contract clause has been executed precisely as written. Vera squeezes my hand. "Are you okay, Grandma? Really okay?" I turn to look at her. She has Vivica's eyes, my mother's chin, her own particular strength that belongs to neither of us. "I am finally okay, sweetheart. For the first time in 32 years, I am okay." My phone chimes. Vivica's face appears on the video call screen, her expression professional but warm. "Mom, the deed transfers for the lodge just recorded officially. The property is entirely in your name now." She pauses. "Have you decided what to do with it?" Vera looks up at me waiting. Through the window, Denver's skyline spreads out under a cloudless summer sky. On the TV, Arthur's mugshot fills the screen above a caption listing his convictions. For 32 years, I lived in Arthur's houses, slept in Arthur's beds, existed in spaces he controlled, designed, owned. Every room was his territory. Every door led somewhere he'd already been. The lodge is different. It's the first property that's purely mine, not awarded in a divorce settlement, not inherited, not shared. Mine. Transferred to my name through Conrad's meticulous legal mapping, reclaimed from the empire Arthur built on fraud. It's also the place where I stopped being his victim and became his prosecutor, where Willard emerged from 19 years of hiding, where Vivica chose her mother over her father's legacy, where the FBI arrested a man who thought he was untouchable. Mom. Vivica's voice pulls me back to the present. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I say. Vera leans against my shoulder. "What will you do with it, Grandma?" I look at my granddaughter, then at my daughter's face on the screen, then out the window where morning light spills across the city I used to cover as an investigative journalist 40 years ago. Arthur's sentence is 42 years. My reclaimed assets total $47 million. I'm 61 years old with a clarity I haven't possessed since I was 29. The lodge sits on 12 acres of Colorado mountain land, isolated enough for privacy, accessible enough for purpose. The main building has been empty since September, except for occasional FBI evidence collection sweeps. The guest cabins have stood vacant for 2 decades. I know exactly what I'll do with it. "I'm going to build something," I tell them. My voice is steady, certain. Something that didn't exist before. Something Arthur never imagined I was capable of creating. Vivica leans closer to her camera. "What kind of something?" I smile, not the careful smile I wore for 32 years, but the kind that belongs to someone who has just finished what she started. "Come to the lodge next week," I say. "Both of you. I'll show you." 14 months after Arthur's arrest, I stand before a hand-carved cedar sign that reads, "Rocky Mountain Investigative Institute for Journalists Exposing Corporate Fraud." The word Ingram appears nowhere. The December morning is crisp and bright construction crews, packing their final equipment into trucks that rumble down the mountain access road. Behind me, the lodge stands completely transformed, not into sterile luxury, but into something solid and welcoming, a sanctuary. Vera runs up the pathway and clasps my hand, breathless. "Grandma, they finished the library wing. 12 workstations for investigative reporters, exactly like you designed." She's 15 now, her voice carrying the same excitement I remember feeling at her age when I landed my first assignment at the Denver Post. I squeeze her hand. "Want to see your office?" she asks. "In a minute," I tell her. "I want to look at this first." The sign is simple, elegant, carved by a local artisan from Colorado cedar. No corporate polish, no gleaming brass, just honest wood and clear purpose. Vivica stands beside me, her expression proud. She's been instrumental in the legal work navigating the incorporation, the nonprofit status, the funding structure that ensures the Institute will operate independently for decades. Behind her, Willard paces the perimeter with the careful attention of someone whose 19-year survival instincts are slowly, carefully fading. The lodge is the same building where Arthur's voice echoed through PA speakers 14 months ago, warning me that resistance was futile. Now it will echo with the voices of journalists learning to expose men exactly like him. Same timbers, same forest, same foundation. But the doors swing wide open and they're no longer locked from the outside. Willard stops beside the sign and runs his hand across the carved letters. He's wearing a working inspector's uniform again, his choice after the restoration. He could have retired on the settlement the state paid him, but he returned to the work Arthur tried to erase. "You gave me back my name," he says quietly. "After 19 years of not existing, you gave me back my name." I turn to face him. "You gave me back my memory, Willard. When I needed someone to believe what I knew was real, you believed me." He nods, then looks up at the lodge. It's strange seeing it like this, open, full of purpose instead of secrets. Strange good or strange bad. Strange like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you're safe, he says. I tell them I need a few minutes alone first. They understand. I walk to the corner office, my office now, and close the door. The room is small, private, with a solid oak desk positioned to catch afternoon light. Through the window, I can see the mountain range stretching toward the western horizon, the same view Arthur must have seen when he stood here planning my destruction. A clean sheet of paper rests on the desk blotter. Articles of incorporation for the Rocky Mountain Investigative Institute, ready for my signature as executive director. Beside the paper sits a blue fountain pen. I stare at it for a long moment. Blue ink. The exact shade Arthur used for 32 years to sign corporate documents, legal contracts, the papers that stripped away pieces of my identity, one signature at a time. He insisted I use blue ink too, said it looked more professional, more authoritative. How many women lost their minds to men like Arthur because no one believed what they knew was true? I pick up the blue pen, feel its weight in my hand, then calmly drop it into the wastebasket beside the desk. The small metallic sound it makes hitting the bottom feels like a door closing on 3 decades. I open the desk drawer and pull out a clean black pen. The articles of incorporation are straightforward, legal, precise. Mission statement, governance, structure, funding mechanisms, editorial independence clauses. Everything Vivica and I drafted over 6 months of careful planning, building something that will outlast both of us. I uncap the black pen and sign my name on the founding document, Judith Ingram, Executive Director. The signature is clean, sharp, precise. My name. Only my name. Not the signature of Arthur Ingram's wife. Not the mark of Arthur Ingram's victim. The name of an investigative journalist who spent 15 years exposing corporate fraud before she was forced to stop, and who spent 14 months documenting a criminal empire that spanned 4 decades. I set down the pen and look at what I've created. Through the window, I can see Vera and Vivica walking the property perimeter with Willard, who's pointing out the security features he designed. Cameras that protect instead of surveil, locks that keep danger out instead of keeping victims in. The Institute will open in January. 6 journalists are already enrolled in the first cohort, mid-career reporters, investigating corporate fraud, environmental crimes, financial manipulation. They'll have access to legal resources, investigative tools, protected workspaces, and something more valuable than any of that belief. When they say they've uncovered something that sounds impossible, someone will believe them. When they present evidence that powerful people claim doesn't exist, someone will help them authenticate it. When they're told they're imagining things, remembering wrong, seeing patterns that aren't there, someone will stand beside them and say, "No, you're right. Keep digging." I pick up the signed articles. The winter sun is beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. Arthur spent 32 years convincing me I was losing my mind. What he never understood, what men like him never understand, is you cannot gaslight a woman who spent 15 years investigating truth for a living. You can steal her confidence. You can steal her name. You can steal her reflection in the mirror, but you cannot steal what she knows. And I knew everything. I knew about the shell companies. I knew about the falsified reports. I knew about Willard's exile and the sanitarium commitment and the 18-month plan to have me declared incompetent. I knew because I am very good at finding evidence, at documenting systematic crimes, at building cases that cannot be dismissed. Arthur is in federal prison for 42 years. His empire has been dismantled. His co-conspirators are serving sentences ranging from 8 to 23 years. Conrad is rebuilding his life, reversing transactions one by one, learning who he is without chemical control. Vivica runs the forensic accounting division of a major firm specializing in corporate fraud detection. Vera is 15 and wants to be a journalist. Willard has his name back. And I have this. A lodge transformed from crime scene to sanctuary, a family rebuilt from fragments, and a signature that belongs only to me. I know which one of us won. And to you, listening to my story, remember this, the truth. You know when your bones is real, even when the world tells you otherwise. For too many years, I made the mistake of doubting my own memory, my own observations, my own instincts. I let Arthur convince me that what I saw wasn't real, that what I remembered was wrong. Don't make my mistake. If something feels wrong, if the numbers don't add up, if the story keeps changing, if you're being told you're imagining things, trust yourself first. The lesson I learned is this: documentation is power. Evidence is freedom. When someone tries to erase you, whether through gaslighting, financial control, or institutional betrayal, paper trails become your lifeline. Write it down, photograph it, record the dates, save the emails. These revenge cheating stories of betrayal and reclamation aren't just about justice. They're about believing yourself enough to fight back. I believe God gave me 15 years as an investigative journalist for a reason, not just to expose corporate fraud, but to recognize it when it entered my own home. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced something like this? Do revenge cheating stories, like mine, help you see your own situation more clearly? Please share this with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to Her Vengeance for more stories about women who refuse to stay silent. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here means more than you know. One final reminder: some details in this story have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling, but the core message, the lesson about documentation, self-trust, and reclaiming your identity, is absolutely real.